Cinemaniacs. Welcome back to another edition of Den of Sin with Devin and James. I'm Devin Lucas, and with me always is my co-host and close friend, James. How you doing, James Dufresne? I think we're saying our last names for the first time on this show.
I was going to say, is this the first time? Hey, Devin, I'm doing good. How you doing, man?
I'm doing okay. I figured we may as well, I don't think it's any secret to anybody that's listening, but may as well start taking actual credit for this podcast when we do actually do it.
Is it taking credit or taking responsibility? Because I think there's two separate things.
You know, you raise a very interesting question, James.
I mean, like we have to fess up to our crimes, own up to our crimes, and take responsibility. But
exactly.
Of course, I jest, but hopefully our listeners find the humor in that and they don't hold us accountable. But yeah, how have you been? It's been a while since we've recorded. It's been a minute. That seems to be this our sort of go about. Normally, our sort of modus operandi is that we have some big gaps between recordings. So how have you been between the recordings?
I've been okay. Not a whole lot to report. My own creative stuff I'm actually doing all right in. Other elements of life are a little unknown right now, but for the most part, and keeping creative, that always kind of helps to keep me sane. But you're right, we do take these long breaks between recordings, and this time there was the usual putting off because of weather or not feeling well, or our usual list of things that might keep us from recording. But this time we've also had a couple of false starts that I think pushed us back by a few weeks, actually, because this episode that we're recording now was initially supposed to be something completely different.
Yeah.
And then actor Ned Beatty passed away.
Mm-hmm.
And R.I.P. Ned Beatty. And I didn't post anything to our social media about it or anything because I figured we would do a whole episode deep diving into Ned Beatty's career. And so we started in on that, and that pushed us back a little bit. And then Richard Donner passed away.
Yes, unfortunately.
And yes. Nothing against Ned Beatty. I would still love to do a deep dive on Ned Beatty someday, although I found it was a little challenging trying to predict what the show about him would be like, because he was 100% character actor, and maybe in the top 5 best character actors of his generation. And I just felt like everything we would be talking about would be about the people that he acted with, or the people who directed him, or because he wasn't playing the main roles in any of these things, I think we would have spent a lot of time talking about other people anyways. And when I heard the unfortunate news about Richard Donner, my immediate thought, well, I had several other immediate thoughts, but when it came to the podcast, the first thought I had was, by doing Richard Donner, we can also do some exploring of some of Ned Beatty's more fun roles as well. So I guess since that's already kind of mentioned, and let's go ahead and talk about Beatty for a second here. Let's maybe start with Superman, because we have so many biggies that we can talk about in this episode. Let's get that one out of the way first.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, definitely my first exposure to Donner. It's funny because I was thinking about this. Richard Donner might be one of the very first directors outside of Steven Spielberg whose names I knew and knew what he was responsible for. It was one of those things where, I'm a big comic book nerd who's probably been brought up on this thing before. I still remember having a Superman the Movie t-shirt and a Superman the Movie TV dinner tray. Remember those? People used to eat on?
I had the Superman one as well. I had the one where Superman was in the Fortress of Solitude. Maybe it was Superman 2.
Oh, yeah. I think the t-shirt and the TV tray were very similar, where it was him flying. I think it was just 2 different photos. The t-shirt was great. Do you remember those old, in the early 70s to the, mid 70s, I guess, to the early 80s, where it was almost like an iron-on, but you bought it like that, where it was like slick and eventually would crack, but it was like shiny and sort of sparkly.
Yeah, I still have some weird sense memory in the very back of my brain of how those things smelled too.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly. But yeah, obviously, it's one. I think obviously he's done some big films and some franchises and stuff. But I think Superman's probably the thing he's probably, if not the thing he's most well known for, probably one of the top 2. Obviously, as a purist, as a comic book fan, there were things about the Superman movies which were so not accurate to the source material as far as his powers and all sorts of crazy things. But it's still, to this day, at the heart of it, the most dead-on, perfect encapsulation of a comic book character, who Superman was, the ideals of Superman. I have a few things I'm going to talk about with the Donner's approach, his whole verisimilitude. I can never say that word, but his approach to filmmaking, which is make it believable, whatever. I have a few things I'm going to say about that later.
Me too, actually, and that's the precise word, verisimilitude. I want to get it tattooed on me because of Richard Donner. And I'm serious. I think that might be my next thing.
I like that. But yeah, it was one of my first favorite movies. As much as I love Donner, I cannot, and I know you'll agree with me on this, I cannot say enough about, obviously, Margot Kidder was great, very idiosyncratic. Obviously, while it's not the most accurate portrayal of Lex Luthor ever, it's one of the most memorable. But I owe so much of that, my love of that movie. And I think the popularity of the movie to Christopher Reeve, what he was able to do as Superman, how he really brought that character to life. In fact, there's a video online I saw maybe 2 years ago, maybe right at the beginning of COVID, that I mean, of course I'd seen, and I even talked about aspects of Reeves's portrayal as Superman, how he did portray Superman different from Clark Kent, and really made that distinction believable. But I saw a video breaking it down where basically Superman's going to basically confess to her, and he sort of, as Clark, he stands up straight, and of course I had seen it, but seeing it broken down like that and focused, it's just like, God, I mean, and of course some of that might be due to obviously direction and Richard Donner, but I mean, Christopher Reeves really brought it to life and was able to sort of make that transformation really happen. And I mean, it's still to this day one of the greatest character portrayals ever. You know, I think we've mentioned it before, where it was almost maybe detrimental to Christopher Reeves' career because that's all people could see him as. But yeah, I mean, it's such a great movie. It has so much heart. It really gets down to the core of, especially at that point. And you know, by the mid 70s, we'd gone through the Kurt Swan years of Superman in the comics, which were released to this day his golden age. Not golden age is also a comic book term which dictates, you know, between the birth of like superhero comics in the late 30s up until I think 45 or 46 is the distinction of the golden age. But I mean in the sense of a golden age for Superman as a character, where the Kurt Swan years, when it got really kind of almost silly because it was doing these big concepts and these funny concepts, but you really saw Superman as this sort of the ideal, you know, as an alien, but he's still truly American in his idea of like what his values that he held up and what we say as our American values held up. And all of those things, Christopher Reeves was able to really, really bring to life. And again, to you know, it's not to discredit Donner, because, you know, I don't know, those of you people who are diehard fans have seen the Donner cut of Superman 2 and the improvement it is over the actual theatrical release. But it's such a phenomenal, I mean, there are people today, I think, who don't. I think there's a generation of kids who it may be too hokey or it's too dated. And I think that's unfortunate, because I think it's still, it's, you know, you'll get the comments like, oh, it's so boring, or it doesn't have enough action. And I kind of sort of agree with that, because again, as a kid, you know, as a young man, like Superman from the Super Friends, and I'd seen Superman, you know, fight giant robots and different things. And so, yes, I can sort of see the argument that it's not as action-packed as part 2, which is phenomenal. It's just such a great movie. And I know you're a big fan too. I know it's close to your heart as well. What are your feelings on Superman the movie?
Superman the movie is literally my first memory of life.
I know you talked about this before.
Yeah. Superman the movie, that goes back as far as breathing for me as a memory. It's having eyeballs starts with Superman. I saw it. I couldn't have even been a year old. I don't know how far back in the release it was, because the movie actually came out about 2 weeks before I was born. But it makes sense that even a year out, it might still be playing the drive-in circuit, which is exactly where I saw it. Yeah. I can still remember seeing it on the screen, and distinctly remember seeing that costume. But other things left impressions on me as well, Hackman and actually Beatty. And then growing up, of course, I became a bigger and bigger fan, and there were sequels, and I was obsessed. And, you know, I had the Underoos, and I did it for Halloween. And now I currently have a Superman tattoo,
yep, which
is a link back to that first memory. So even though I have a version of Superman on my arm that comes directly from the comic books from the 1940s, what it represents to me is actually Christopher Reeve. So, and Richard Donner. And like you said, Richard Donner became one of the first people that I knew as a name as a director. But, you know, it taught me not just what I enjoy, but like I said, it kind of had those little lessons in it. This is how a person is supposed to act. This is what a good guy does. Saving the cat from the tree and then stopping the earthquake after that. So it was maybe a high bar to set for a little boy, and I've certainly fallen short of it. There was a story that I read just since Donner's passing, actually, that pertains to Superman, the first one. As I think most people know by now, Gene Hackman has been retired since 2004, ever since Welcome to Mooseport. I that will continue to bother me that was Gene Hackman's last film.
Yeah.
But the great Gene Hackman, of course, played Lex Luthor, and he hardly ever says anything these days, but he did give a statement to the Hollywood Reporter about the passing of Richard Donner, and he said he showed up to shoot that movie, and he had what he thought was the perfect Lex Luthor mustache, and he was very attached to this mustache. If you look at other movies from this period, this was kind of the mustache era of Hackman.
Yeah.
And he showed up to meet Richard Donner, who also had a rather thick mustache. And Donner told him that he'd like him to shave the mustache, and Hackman explained that this is what he thinks the real Lex Luthor would look like, and they kind of went back and forth a little bit. And then Donner finally says, "Tell you what I'll do. If you shave off your mustache, I will shave off my mustache. It's only fair." And so Hackman said, okay, I guess that's fair. And so he shaved his mustache, and then in celebration, he watched as Richard Donner peeled his off of his face. This guy knew what he was doing. He researched his actors beforehand. He knew that Hackman was going to be attached to that mustache, and he walked into that first meeting knowing how he was going to deal with this.
That is insane. I've never heard that. That's crazy.
I mean, he did similar things with Brando, and Marlon Brando, of course, played Superman's father in the first part of the film and little parts throughout. Both Donner and Christopher Reeve have kind of railed on Brando's, both his behavior and his performance in Superman, and that's fully justified.
Yeah. I actually love his performance as Jor-El. I think but I don't know how much of that is because of nostalgia or whatever. And I will be honest and say, I haven't seen Superman the movie in well over a decade, which is surprising. I've seen Superman 2 and Superman 3 more recently than Superman the movie. It's probably been like 11 years, but I'm an old man, so 11 years is not big of a drop in the bucket. But I don't know. I think, and I when they used the Jor-El voiceover in Man of Steel, or no, it was in Superman Returns. Did they also use it? No, because it was stupid ass. It was not Kevin Costner. It was Russell Crowe. Anyways, I have a thing against Russell Crowe. But it's not that he's a bad actor. It's just anyway. And he's been great. I loved him in Nice Guys, but. And that's a whole, we're not going there. Anyways, but I don't know. I just really I love his Jor-El. I love the voice. I don't know. But again, it's probably all nostalgia. But as far as him actually in who he was as a person at that point and the pain in the ass he was on set, fully warranted, of course. Like nobody could argue otherwise.
I mean, I love him as Jor-El as well. But it's the type of thing like with 2020 hindsight, I can look back as much as I love his performance of Jor-El and see from a director's perspective, kind of this guy who comes in and does this slow reading, and at times was like literally like he was reading off of the diaper of the baby that played Superman.
That's right.
So that slow delivery that seems so deliberate, it's deliberate because he's reading. And
I love it though.
And because it's Brando, he pulls it off. But yeah, apparently Brando showed up on the set, and Donner had been warned that Brando likes to find the easiest way out of anything, and that he would probably suggest some sort of a shape that should play Jor-El, and that he should do it as a voiceover. And so, of course, the first day on the set, Marlon Brando comes up and says something along the lines of, nobody's ever seen Jor-El, and nobody really knows Kryptonians, so maybe Kryptonians look like a bagel. And and he asks Donner, what do you think of that? And Donner says, well, I was told to expect you to say, what if Jor-El looked like a green suitcase? But, if you think that he looks like a bagel, that's fine. Just remember, we have Superman. We know what Superman looks like, and he's from Krypton. So my guess is that he looks like Superman's dad, which shut Brando straight up.
I love it. Yeah, exactly.
Brando. Yeah. between Brando and Hackman, probably at his most feisty because he was still, French Connection hot at that time.
Was he ever not feisty though?
No, and that's part of why I love him so much. And
exactly.
Hackman was born in San Bernardino, so we grew up drinking the same water.
Exactly. We know we
but Ned Beatty, just to bring this back around to him for a moment. I remember I had the trading cards for Superman, the Topps trading cards that came with a stick of gum, and they all had there were scenes from the movie, but they all had like their one kind of studio press photo introduction to the character card.
Mm-hmm.
And I still remember to this day the exact image of Ned Beatty just looking stupid, and underneath it says "Bumbling Crook Otis." And I think it was one of the first things I learned how to read, Bumbling Crook Otis. So I will still sometimes, just referring to him in that movie, say, oh yeah, and then Bumbling Crook Otis comes in. Like, it's just...
But that's his full title.
But he's so good in it. All this stuff about, are we going to Addis Ababa, Mr. Luthor? What are they wearing in Addis Ababa? Looks like a burnous. It's... Nobody else could have done that part. Not in the same way.
And the thing is, Ned Beatty looked like a Kurt Swan drawing. He looked like a drawing of a character like that, of a bumbling crook. Like, he looked cartoonish, especially at the. I mean, I'll have that too. His just simple as costuming and everything. But yeah, agreed. It was, he just looked like a bumbling crook. But yes, I agree. Very. He almost made me sad. I always felt bad for Otis, and I think that's unintentional. Obviously, I think like. Yeah, he's a bad guy.
Otis and Miss Tessmacher were both abused by Luthor throughout the film.
Yeah. So Miss Tessmacher might have been one of my first early crushes too.
She's still around, Valerie Perrine, and I follow her on Twitter. I really don't look at Twitter very often at all, as I'm sure anybody that listens to this can attest to by looking at our Twitter feed. But Valerie Perrine is one of the people I follow because I love. She was also in Lenny and several things that I love from that period. Slaughterhouse-5. Yeah. But she's always putting up pictures of her back in the day, and she put up some nice ones of her on Superman somewhat recently after Donner passed. So, yeah, if you want to find some cool pictures of Miss Tessmacher, go check out her Twitter.
I will do it. I'll do that. I will certainly do that.
Before we get too far on Superman, I did want to point out there are a lot of casting what ifs throughout Donner's career, and there are certainly a lot of like what ifs for things that he could have directed.
Yeah,
there are very few parts that have as many what ifs as Superman and the characters in Superman. So I've got a list here. If you'll indulge me, I have a list.
Please.
I
still remember there was a Wizard magazine, which was it was really the first. It's kind of an entertainment weekly just for comic books, and I remember Wizard magazine in the 90s had a whole article about this very topic. So I'm very fast. I haven't read it and thought about it in a long time. And I do know a few names on the list. I don't know if I'll know everyone, but go ahead.
Well, and just to cover ourselves, this is just internet research. I don't know. Like, some of these names may have been floated on the list by wishful thinking on the behalf of fans over the course of the last 40 some odd years since this movie came out. But some of these are confirmable. In fact, some of the weirder ones are confirmable. First off, Sam Peckinpah almost directed the movie.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, could have been crazy. Probably not bad.
No, I wish I lived in a reality. I wish I could at least visit a reality where that was true.
Yeah, me too. And then as far as playing the boy in blue, there was Warren Beatty, John Beck, Charles Bronson, James Caan, Sam Elliott, Burt Reynolds, Chris Christopherson, Nick Nolte, who apparently got pretty far, Al Pacino, Robert Redford, John Travolta, who tried out before he was even a star, Arnold Schwarzenegger. That one I'm not sure I believe, but maybe. Ryan O'Neal, Jeff Bridges, Jan Michael Vincent, David Soul from Starsky and Hutch, Robert Wagner, Christopher Walken, which at least would have kept up with the Alien roots.
Yeah.
John Voight, and Muhammad Ali and Elton John were all considered.
Wait, what? Elton John? I've never heard that one. That doesn't even make sense.
There was a version of this before Donner came on board that was really high camp. That was where the Salkings, the producers, originally wanted to take it.
Yeah.
It was following more in the Batman 66 tradition. There was even a Kojak cameo, like not a Telly Savalas cameo in the
like
original
a Kojak.
script. Like Kojak was there with his lollipop and said, "Who loves you, baby?" to Superman.
Oh god damn, that's terrible.
I also have singled out here Sly Stallone lobbied really hard to get the part and did not get far because nobody wanted Stallone. Paul Newman was given the choice of Superman, Lex Luthor, or Jor-El, turned down all three. And then people who were considered for the role of Lex Luthor were George Kennedy, Jack Nicholson, Dustin Hoffman, and Gene Wilder. Now, Gene Wilder might have actually... Gene Wilder with the shaved head.
I think that could have been incredible.
That's another what if where I wish I could kind of travel to that alternate universe. I want to see the version of the movie directed by Sam Peckinpah with Gene Wilder in it.
Wasn't maybe it was a Peckinpah affiliation, but wasn't Clint Eastwood, I thought, on one of the
Clint Eastwood was on one of the lists. He was not considered for very long because he just didn't have the right physique for it. That was also what took Reynolds off the list. Although I think Reynolds has a closer tie to it than Eastwood would have.
It's so funny. We were talking about this recently. I was actually talking about this at a party. Chris Reeves will always be, Superman to me as far as the live action Superman. Like Henry Cavill looks like a Superman. With the costuming helps, but I mean, he looks like a physical presence. And, people sort of lobby complaints that Chris Reeves was too skinny, and of course, you don't like. As a Kryptonian, he doesn't need to be a bodybuilder to lift a tank. He's just, But the thing is, people saw a few years ago, like a bunch of photos got released of basically Chris Reeves at that time working out for the role of Superman, and he was huge. It's just the costuming sort of dulled down all of his quote unquote gains, all of the muscle mass he'd put on and all how jacked he really was. And I felt like he was sort of cheated because he actually was in incredible shape. It's just that, Lycra doesn't, it's not like comic books. It doesn't look like, color painted on your body. It literally, actually, if anything, Lycra sort of mutes all of your definition. It just sort of, keeps your overall shape or whatever.
That color didn't help him very much either. But that
exactly.
That color was the blue that wouldn't wash into the blue screen. They wanted a darker blue, but you would have just seen a floating head.
Yeah, exactly.
Before I get too far out, I have a couple more casting possibilities, but these are not for Superman. These are kind of fun because they're for some real side characters. Charlton Heston was considered for Jor-El, which I actually on any universe think is better than Marlon Brando.
I can get down with that.
I think Brando's the better actor. I think Heston gives the better fucks.
Yeah, exactly.
Ed Asner and Walter Matthau were considered for Perry White. Either of those
would have been great. Yep.
Genius, yes. Yep. Peter Boyle tried out for Bumbling Crook Otis.
Would have also been great, I think.
Would have been great, but maybe
a little though too.
I think Beatty's the better one. I think
he's more dopey. I think he almost would have been more sinister. Maybe just because I'm thinking of him in Taxi Driver. Like he just I'm thinking of more seedy. Not Taxi Driver.
That was him in Taxi Driver. Yes,
Hardcore as well. True, but I think the image of him I'm thinking of is in Hardcore. Yeah. He's sort of a good guy in that. Anyways, a bad good guy. Anyways, doesn't matter.
And then just to top it off, because this is I had no idea about this and I was kind of floored, and I'm really torn as to what I would want on this. Christopher Lee was offered Zod. I can see by your eyes you hadn't heard this either.
No, in fact, I mean, God,
Terrence Stamp, come on.
I love Terrence Stamp, and he's great in it. But Christopher Lee, 6'5", whatever, 6'4", Christopher. If anything, maybe he would have been too tall and too imposing. But I mean, I love Terrence Stamp, so it's not necessarily a loss. But I think Christopher Lee could have been pretty incredible, especially in that outfit and that like that 70s see-through-y, meshy, whatever, like blouse that they wear. Anyways, I don't know. That's incredible. I had never heard that. Or if I had, I'd forgotten it. But, man, that's incredible.
And you kind of touched on yourself a little bit of what comes next. I think we're doing, even though we've talked about Superman a lot, not just today, but we've talked about Superman a lot throughout our entire time with this podcast. But Richard Donner was really screwed over by Pierre Spengler and the Salkind. I almost said brothers, but I think it's a father and son. Yeah. Donner was doing Superman 1 and 2 back to back. And that was one of the ways they were able to get Brando and Hackman, was that they were able to shoot all of their material for 1 and 2 at the same time. Donner really wanted to take this in an epic direction, which he certainly did with the first movie. There are elements of John Ford meets David Lean in Superman the movie.
Yeah.
And then Richard Lester, who kind of came in to work as a liaison between Donner and the Salkinds once things started to sour, he ended up getting the role of directing part 2 after Richard Donner had already directed something like 75 to 80% of the movie. And Lester's entire take on it was to make it funny, not necessarily camp funny, not Batman 66 funny, but to make it funnier than anything David Lean ever did. I mean, that, and it makes sense because Richard Lester did 3 Musketeers movies also for the Salkinds and got his start with things like Hard Day's Night, which is a really funny movie and a subversively funny movie. Yeah. So I never blame Richard Lester for the nightmare that is the story of Superman 2. I don't think either versions of the film are a nightmare. I think both versions of the film are of equal greatness in a lot of ways, and equal weaknesses in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't be doing Donner any favors, I think, without mentioning what went down and the fact that he did direct about 80% of this and deserved the credit. He actually refused to take the credit.
That's right. I read that.
Which is why Richard Lester had to go back and shoot more. It wasn't that he was trying to cover Donner's traces or that there was something wrong with what Donner was filming. It was Directors Guild rules. If you don't direct more than half of the movie, you don't get a director's credit. And the guy who directed more than half of the movie was refusing any credit. So Superman 2 was coming close to being an Alan Smithy
project. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
The fake name. If you ever see a movie with the name Alan Smithy credited as either writer or director, you're either in for the best or the worst night of your life.
Exactly.
It's that is the name that the guilds give to something where the artists have abandoned it. And they were not going to do that with Superman. So it was the smarter thing to do, and Lester brought his own style to it. Every scene that you see in either version of Superman 2 that involves Marlon Brando or Gene Hackman, and especially with Hackman in part 2, that's no small number of scenes.
Yeah.
That was all directed by Richard Donner. Hackman refused to come back to work with Lester, and in fact did not work with Lester for Superman 3 either. They went and got Robert Vaughn to play kind of a Lex Luthor stand-in
type. Yeah.
And I have a soft spot for Superman 3 as well.
I look, that robot lady still fucks me up. I don't know, man. It, and then the snake transformation scene in Dreamscape. All I do is watch horror movies. Nothing scares me. Those 2 sequences in these not horror movies terrify me, which is so bizarre. Real quick though, too, I just wanted to touch upon. First off, too, I had a great idea when you were talking. A podcast called Alan Smithy Presents, where he literally just goes through the history of every single Alan Smithy film. Probably never get around to it, but if you're listening to this and want a good idea for a podcast, if it does not, maybe it already exists. I'm not an expert on what podcasts are already out there, but I think it's a pretty good idea for a podcast anyways.
Yeah, that's not bad. That's not bad at all.
Yeah, there was a few things as a comic book fan, as a Superman comic book fan, things that he did, like giving Superman all these goofy powers that he doesn't have, like being able to kiss you when you lose your memory or throwing the shield.
That wasn't Donner, though. That was all Lester.
And
both of those things were Lester.
I was about to say, there was a lot of things when you're young that you sort of, but also too, I mean, I'm sure some of that also too might have been studio stuff as well. But
yeah.
But still upset me as a kid. As a kid, I was very, first off, where's the Toy Man and where's Metallo? Like, where's all of his cool supervillains? Why are we getting, anyways? But I feel like people to this. I mean, the last thing I'll say about Superman the movie and even Superman 2, less about Superman 3 and Superman 4, but people will have. There's all these articles now, the greatest superhero movies, blah blah blah, and every year it seems like Superman the movie gets pushed further and further down the list. And maybe it's my age and maybe it's perspective, but I feel like anybody who can't appreciate the fucking majesty and the beauty and the heart of that super, especially I actually kind of prefer Superman 2 as far as an overall movie, because it does sort of, give Superman more to do than just catch falling helicopters. But it's so fucking good. And it's like, it was the first time where you could believe, like the whole tagline, "You believe a man can fly," and it's like it was true, and it I don't know, man. I just in this day and age where superhero movies are the sort of de rigueur, like this, it's sort of most things now. I remember a time when a superhero movie was like incredible news. Like they're going to do a fantastic. Roger Corman's doing a Fantastic Four movie. Oh boy, I can't wait to. Now it's like every other TV show is a superhero property. But the fact that this was truly the first real superhero movie, and they nailed it in so many ways, in so many important ways, and a lot of that was because of how Richard Donner wanted to make it believable. He wanted it to, yes, be about this alien with super unbelievable powers and stuff, but really root him in a likable, relatable human being, and the characters. And I don't know, I know a lot of it is nostalgia because, again, it was an important movie when I was a kid. I think its importance can never be understated. So that's the last thing I want to say about Superman the movie.
Okay, I should be done with it, but I am going to bring back that word verisimilitude because I think it applies so directly to Superman, and I think we're early enough here in our tribute to Donner now. I want to point this out because as people are remembering Donner films as we talk about them, because I think this is one where in a lot of cases most people will have seen at least the major ones that we talk about. You'll notice that he does have a very distinct style. Yes, he has some distinct trademark looks. He likes to film things in crowds. He does some incredible work with panning shots through like busy rooms that still manage to keep focus on the actors that you're supposed to be keeping focus on. But what I really love about him is his storytelling style, which for those who don't know, the word verisimilitude, in fact, you know what? Somewhere here, I've got Richard Donner's actual explanation of what the word means. Yes. Okay. So this is a direct quote from Richard Donner. It's a word that refers to being real, not realistic. Yes, there is a difference, but real. It was a constant reminder to ourselves if we gave into the temptation we knew there would be to parody Superman, we would only be fooling ourselves. So he put up a sign in the writing office that said verisimilitude so that everyone remembered you don't have to be realistic. We know that part of this takes place in an alien world. We know part of this involves a man with all these superpowers. But if we create a world around him that's believable, not realistic, believable, then people will believe a man can fly. I mentioned this too. We'll come back, I think, a little later. In fact, I know a little later to the movie that Donner made just before Superman. But that's another movie that has an incredible amount of verisimilitude, which is, I think, what makes it strong. So we'll come back to that and probably touch on a few of these, how kind of outlandish some of these plots are, but the way that they're handled in a way that makes you buy into it for 2 hours. And that has been something that has influenced me personally as a writer. Even though Donner really didn't do a lot of writing himself. He kind of had Tom Mankiewicz, I think, was his personal guy. When he felt like a script wasn't working exactly, he'd bring Tom Mankiewicz in because he liked Mankiewicz's voice as his own voice. And I think Mankiewicz understood that verisimilitude and the humor. And the humor is really the humor in Superman, the humor in Lethal Weapon, the humor in all of these things. It's part of what makes that world believable, because when something outrageous happens, there's usually someone there to point out that it's outrageous. Superman comes out and there's the guy who tells him he has a bad outfit, like that first moment that, woo, you're pointing out how ridiculous this is, but that's the realistic or that's the believable reaction from the person when he comes out on the street. He flew away like a big blue bird. Like so many people in the movie are saying, this is ridiculous. Men can't fly. And it'll come up over and over again. And it really does guide my work. Is this believable? Can I create this world? And even if I kind of break some of the laws of physics or certain kinds of personalities or certain kinds of relationships, as long as it's believable, it'll work. And I don't know if there's any other writers or directors listening to this, but that is something that you could take to heart and apply to your work as well. It seems so simple, but it's actually it's made my writing so much better and somehow easier since I started filtering it through that word. But anyways, to keep it on Ned Beatty for a moment, I would like to kind of move to the next thing with Ned Beatty that he did. Oh, real quick, I do want to say Superman 2, the Donner cut, is the original Zack Snyder cut. Like, we had to wait decades to get our cut.
That's right.
So anyone that complains about having to wait 2 years to get the Snyder cut, fuck you.
That's right.
The Donner cut took decades. There was no guarantee it was ever going to be a thing. Donner himself said it was never going to be a thing. So yeah, I actually consider that one of the most important director's cuts ever released is the Richard Donner cut of Superman 2.
Absolutely.
Okay, so to keep with the Ned Beatty pathway here, we can kind of take it in any other direction after this, but I want to make sure Ned Beatty gets properly celebrated. Although the next film that he did with Richard Donner is a bit problematic, to put it somewhat lightly, and that is The Toy with Richard Pryor.
Oh, yeah. Which I gotta say, that was a movie I really enjoyed as a kid.
I still really enjoy it, and there's a part of me that just has to put up with the fact that I'll always feel a little weird about how much I love The Toy. It was an HBO great growing up. It was on.
Oh, 100%. That's where. Yep, absolutely. It was a staple of HBO.
It was the entry point in my world to the world of Richard Pryor. And granted, I started to listen to Richard Pryor albums far too young, but it really did start with Superman 3 and The Toy being around constantly. And I still think it's kind of a fun movie. And for those that don't know, the simple way to put The Toy is that the son of a very rich man in Louisiana comes home from boarding school for 2 weeks and is allowed to pick up one toy in the department store his father owns. And he picks a black man as his toy. Specifically, he picks Richard Pryor, who is starting his first day as the night custodian of said department store, but he's actually a journalist, and this job was already beneath him, and now he's about to become the toy for this rich white kid. So yeah, just on the surface of it, very problematic.
Very much so. But they kind of
they're making fun of the racists in this movie. There's no doubt. Like its heart is in the right place. Its head is way off though.
Yeah.
And that happens with some other Donner films, which I'll bring up in a second too.
But I mean, the thing is, they address the fact that it's an offensive concept or that the idea is insane. I mean, Richard Pryor literally vocalizes that, but would that movie get made today? I mean, I was going to say no, but I actually could see somebody like Kevin Hart doing a remake of it and maybe going more in depth on what it is and how it's saying it. But I still thought it was a funny movie, phenomenal cast. I was very jealous of that kid because it was like on TV around the same time we had the TV show Silver Spoons and Ricky Schroeder's character, who, by the way, Ricky Schroeder as a human being is a piece of shit, and fuck Ricky Schroeder to death because he's a scumbag human being. Sorry if you're a fan. But sorry, not sorry.
I'm not sorry if you're a fan.
I was going to say, sorry, not sorry.
If you're a fan of Ricky Schroeder, I am never coming over for movie night at your house, ever.
Exactly, 100%. 100%. But, Ricky Schroeder's character in Silver Spoons, he was like, oh, this kid had his own, train that went around his house. No, the kid from The Toy blows Ricky Schroeder and Silver Spoons out of the water. That kid had every cool thing imaginable, including a human being. But,
and Spider-Man pajamas that were maybe the number one most envious thing on TV in my childhood. I wanted those Spider-Man PJs.
You have no idea how much what you're saying was resonating with me, because I had the exact same thought. They were so much better than normal underoos. Oh God, I'm so upset. You're 100% right.
It upset me that I could never find them in stores. I didn't know if my mom would ever buy them for me or not, but how come I could never find them in stores? And I could almost swear that my cousin had a pair when I was that age, but it must have just been a shirt that because I was 3. I probably just thought his shirt were those PJs. I don't think those PJs were ever commercially available. But I will say Richard Pryor, the first actor to don the Spider-Man outfit in a Columbia Pictures film. Next would be Tobey Maguire. But
true.
But yeah, its politics are pretty clear. The movie's politics are pretty clear. It's pointing out the absurdity of this situation, and by the end, it becomes this zany madcap chase through a party that's being attended by several KKK members.
That's right.
And it turns into a big pie fight, basically. And I think that's that's where the politics become a little muddled. And then in the end,
Yeah.
Jackie Gleason turns out to be a good guy, but is it because he was only placating the KKK for business purposes? Or was it because now he's a reformed racist? Or like, I don't know who learned the lessons and what, or what exactly the lessons that Jackie Gleason was learning.
You make a good point.
So it's just really muddled, and I really don't like, as satisfying as it may sound to watch the Grand Wizard of the KKK fall face first into a bowl of chocolate pudding. There's some problematic elements just to the lightness of that situation. So he probably, it wouldn't be made today, I don't think, in the same way. I think someone could pull it off, but it would not be quite. First off, it probably wouldn't be an antebellum South, you know.
That's right.
There was literally a Dixieland flag hanging behind Richard Pryor in the toy store when he's getting paid the money to be the toy.
That's right.
Which, the balls on this movie, really.
Yeah, really.
Another thing, though, that I will point out, just for any of you fans out there, I salivated a bit during that whole department store sequence in the first place, because they have, like, there's a whole wall panel of Mego toys that they stand in front of for quite a while before he gets to the Wonder Wheel. So if you want to go shopping 1982 style, just watch that scene from the toy, and you'll see probably some flashbacks to things that you either wanted or had.
For real. And as a toy collector to this day, yes, I wish I had a time machine. I do have to mention, though, because we mentioned Miss Tessmacher, talking about salivating, Teresa Ganzel was another very early crush, to the point where I would rewatch. To me,
she's probably the most racist character in the movie, too.
Yeah, she's vile. She's a vile character. Very hateable.
She's so good, and if you see, she used to be on Johnny Carson all the time, and if you see him actually interview her instead of just cast her in a skit, she's clearly not that woman. She's not the ditzy,
no.
But she was so good. But it's
weird because she, to me, like, you know, the character of Harley Quinn, which is I'm not a fan of. I don't. Well, anyways, at least not the way that the fandom has sort of embraced problematic aspects of the Harley Quinn character. But to me, Harley Quinn character worked best when she was created in the Batman the Animated Series as a sort of gangster's mall, like, because that's really what she was. And you know, the Batman, I swear this has a point. But you know, the Batman Animated Series takes place in this sort of like pseudo neo noir kind of setting, this ambiguous time frame, but it's definitely very much inspired by the 40s, and if there's definitely, like I said, an aesthetic of the 40s and early 50s. But to me, for some reason, Teresa Ganzel, when I would see Harley Quinn, I would sort of remind, I think it's the voice that kind of like, you know, Teresa Ganzel wasn't doing a 40s gangster mall, but the blonde hair, the buxomness, there's something that she always, whenever I would see Harley Quinn, it would remind me of Teresa. It's just this weird association I have. It's a personal association, but it's always fun. To me, I always thought she would have been like, I mean, obviously that character was created 20 years after the toy, and you know, but I don't know, this is a weird association that I've always had with her, where you know, once I started seeing Harley Quinn, I just like, man, she would have been the perfect actress to play that character. And
I totally see it though, like her perky cheeks and everything.
Yeah, just that like kind of like ditzy, but kind of like dangerous, kind of like, plus the look, anyways. But yeah, but the voice, I think, is a lot to do with it.
Yeah. No, I definitely remember her. It's been a little while since I've seen the movie, but I will never forget her from this and from all of her appearances on Johnny Carson. Moving from the toy, I'm just gonna. I know I'm guiding a lot of this. I'm gonna ask.
Guide along. I mean,
well, just while we're in the general area of the toy, I'm gonna look backwards in Donner's career for a second to point out two other problematic movies. Now the toy, I would still be in favor of the toy being in constant release and people being able to make their own opinions about it and all that, because I actually do think that it's a good performance by Pryor and Gleason. But he did one, it was actually his second movie ever. His first was one called X-15, which I'm not even really going to bring up because it was practically a documentary for the Air Force and NASA, and for fans of that sort of thing, it's got a lot of footage, you know, of the actual X-15 doing its thing up in the atmosphere. It's narrated by Jimmy Stewart, and I'm falling asleep just fucking describing it.
Exactly. Exactly.
But it's out there on YouTube, and Mary Tyler Moore's film debut was in that, so I guess that's notable. But anyways, his second film was a little bit bigger, and it's his first attempt at a buddy comedy, and it's actually got some very light things in common with some other stuff he would do later on. It's a buddy action comedy about two nightclub owners who somehow get caught up in a weird sort of taking over the world sort of conspiracy in swinging London. And the the two nightclub owners are played by Peter Lawford and Sammy Davis Jr. And the name of the movie is Salt and Pepper.
Wow.
I'm going to give that a second to let the eye rolls sort of kick in. And before you dare think it's racist, just know that they point out multiple times in the movie that Peter Lawford is actually Pepper and Sammy Davis Jr. is actually Salt in the movie. That's their names. It's filled with, I maybe being a little hard on it. I don't know how you stand with the Rat Pack. I love the Rat Pack. I idolize the Rat Pack, but also there was a special brand of racism that kind of stems from the Rat Pack and the aura of their humor. And usually what it was an excuse to make the racist joke anyways. But because Sammy Davis Jr. was there was somebody to roll their eyes and say, these guys aren't really that bad.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in this. People making jokes at Sammy Davis Jr.'s expense, and then he never literally winks at the audience, but he basically winks at the audience every time it happens. And then he turns around and he'll make some sort of a snide comment that's equally racist about Asian people, And of course, they're in England, so you can imagine there's a certain word that's a slur in the United States, but in England has multiple meanings and starts with an F.
Yeah.
They have a lot of fun with that word in this movie because they're in England, and Sammy Davis Jr. keeps on thinking he's being called something he's not. And I hate that sort of reputation has to precede this kind of work, but honestly, I would defend it more if Salt and Pepper was a better movie because it's just kind of dumb. I think mostly it's just kind of pointless and I mean, if you like Sammy Davis Jr., he does a couple of good songs in it. I've seen it a few times. Like I said, I'm a fan of the Rat Pack specifically, and both of these guys, Lawford and Sammy Davis Jr., are members of the proper Ocean's 11 Rat Pack. So if you're a fan of that, check it out. You'll probably find something redeemable. I don't hate it, but it's very difficult to recommend just as a culturally sensitive person or as a person trying to be more culturally sensitive, such as myself. You kind of can't be woke unless you've been asleep for a while. So
yeah.
So I will confess I've seen that movie a few times. Again, I will defend the toy much harder than I will defend Salt and Pepper. One that I will not defend at all, and I promise this is the last one before. This is the last one of the super problematic movie. But this one, I can't even believe it was made then. Okay, James, I used to work at Warehouse Music, and I ordered this movie not knowing what it was. I went off the title and the performer and the director, thinking, oh, this might be interesting. But let me try to just give you a quick premise. An American writer of erotica, played by Charles fucking Bronson, lives in England where he falls in love with a 16-year-old schoolgirl played by Susan George. 16 is the age of consent there, so their relationship still brings legal issues, but the solution for them is to elope to Scotland where it's legal to get married, and then move to America where it's legal to be married if they've already been married somewhere else. Yay! And there they run into the normal and kind of frankly dull issues of him not wanting to do teenage things and not being into rock and roll, and her getting bored with him, and then eventually she leaves. And now she's thousands of miles away from home, and the name of the movie is Twinkie, and I just really wonder what is Twinkie for. Who apparently Bronson brought the idea to Donner, brought the script to Donner. And Donner probably didn't want to turn it down because it was Bronson and a check and a chance to make, I think it was his third movie. He didn't direct again for another several years. Not a film. He directed some TV. But yeah, he didn't direct any films for quite a while after Twinkie. Have you ever seen Twinkie?
No, I haven't. It's known as like 4 other things though, isn't it?
Twinkie is the title that I bought the DVD under, and then it's also been called London Affair and Lola. Even though there's no one named Lola, I'm sure that was just an exploitation marketing grab for Lolita. It's not even as interesting as Lolita, and Lolita is not even as interesting as Lolita. That has become maybe my least favorite Kubrick film on its own, just because every version of Lolita has failed to point out that there was an introduction to that book that's from the perspective of a doctor who is telling you that Humbert is so far gone, is so sick, is so lost in his own psychoses that he is not a reliable witness to the facts that happen. And then the whole story is then told from Humbert's perspective, trying to justify what he was doing with Lolita. Yeah. And every single movie has captured the Humbert perspective and left out the fact that Humbert is already locked up for doing something rotten.
Yeah.
Multiple things that are rotten. And you don't have the murder story in Twinkie, but you just don't have much else there either. Bronson is just sparkless.
I can imagine, yeah. Definitely not a role. Yeah.
Like the typical things you'd expect, like rock and roll comes on the stereo. Oh, what is this? Like that Bronson sort of...
Yeah, just dourness.
You don't see what he sees in her. You do not see what she sees in him. I mean, Suzanne George is usually awesome. Dirty Mary, Crazy Larry, Straw Dogs. The list goes on and on. Yeah. Charles Bronson, obviously, I'm a huge fan of, but nothing to really look at in this movie. And I think that if Donner could have, he probably would have had this movie burned, then had it buried, and then had it built over, so that it would never escape again. And it is on public domain. And if someone's really interested in kind of seeing a timepiece, it is available to watch. I usually am more in favor of, no matter how offensive a movie like this can get, that it should be available for people that are A, curious, or B, like historically inclined to document this stuff so that we can kind of at least keep track of where we've been. Because this movie's condemning the main character's actions even within the movie. It's interesting. I really don't know who it was speaking to or who it was made for, but this wasn't trying to pass off that it was ever a good idea that these two people be together. And everybody that was around, I mean, cops would show up and ask if her dad's in. Bronson's mother starts sobbing immediately the first time he meets her new daughter-in-law. Like, people are reacting appropriately to finding out that these two are a couple within the movie. So I just don't know who they're fighting for or against, or very confusing movie. Yeah, I wouldn't have watched it if I hadn't seen it in a catalog working at Warehouse Music as a romantic drama starring Charles Bronson, directed by Richard Donner, titled Twinkie. I'm like, yeah, sign me the fuck up. I want to find out what this is about.
Absolutely.
And then, got the disc, and I think it was only like $2. It's very public domain, where it belongs. But yeah, not the best $2 I ever spent, but my curiosity got the better of me about 20 years ago.
Hey man, look, not everything can be a shining, an example of incredible cinema. I feel like, first off, don't want to expedite this too much, but I also don't want this to be another 2-parter or a 4-hour podcast. So maybe we will breeze through some of his later works, because there's definitely, you can feel free to talk about, what you want to talk about, but we still have so many movies to get to. I do think, well, I'll get to that point. I will make it in a bit, but okay. Well, let's talk about what I still will probably consider his best movie. And I know there's some people that would find umbrage with that, but I truly think his best movie as an actual film director. And it's one of my favorite movies. It's such a great movie. And there's so many facets of why it's a great movie, but let's talk about The Omen.
Yes, I love The Omen.
First off, mid-70s, as a horror fan, is like the gift that keeps on giving. If you are a new fan, like if you have never discovered, or if you're not familiar with that era of filmmaking, first off, the 70s filmmaking is in general just unending wealth of gems. But there was mid-70s for American horror where it was just one work of genius after another. And The Omen is right there at the top of that list. And a lot of these movies coming around were like playing off of, there was a newfound spirituality and like a new age movement that was happening. And there was a lot of novels coming out about like the devil, and, this kind of, new fear of American, religious This whole podcast could be about like what America was going through that time and what really spurned the American take on the horror movie. But The Omen, which is basically essentially just, at this point, it's almost become old hat, although at the time it was definitely very new and very original. But it's basically a telling of the Antichrist, but from the point of view of the Antichrist as a small child, and then it became, the Omen franchise, which we don't need to go into all of them, but it did spawn an entire full film franchise that had a beginning, middle, and end. But first off, The Omen, the one thing I will always give Donner, even to some of his later movies, at least the ones I've seen, is he was a great visual director. His work with his photography and his DPs and stuff is always great. I mean, he worked with some great DPs. But The Omen looks amazing. The soundtrack is fucking incredible. You have an older Gregory Peck who just fucking kills it in every frame of every second he is on screen. Gregory Peck is just being Gregory Peck at his most amazing.
It's one of my favorite Peck performances, and he's got like 100 of them.
Yeah, exactly, 100%. But the whole cast is great. Lee Remick, the whole cast is great. There's so many great moments. It's truly creepy. The casting of the young boy and everything they did with him, because he's a very sweet looking, very beautiful little boy. Aesthetically, there's you can see angelic with his sort of curly hair and stuff, but he gives these fucking dead eye stares that are truly haunting and terrifying. And the music in this is so important. All the sound design in this movie is so incredible. Between this, The Exorcist, and Rosemary's Baby, there's a lot of the movies about the devil and even multiple films about the Antichrist, whatever, and they're all great. And The Omen is just one of those movies. I've probably seen The Omen 25, 30 times, and I'm captivated every single time. And that's hard to do, especially with horror, because once you've sort of been experienced to the sort of twists and turns of horror, to be able to revisit it, there has to be a lot of like meat on that bone. There has to be a lot of reasons to sort of, and it's everything about it works. And I still get creeped out. I mean, there's something so truly haunting. Like, it's all for you, Damien. Like, there's just so many incredible aspects of this movie. And, I've heard people recently kind of, honestly, it's become almost popular to sort of tear down classics like The Exorcist and say The Exorcist is overhyped and blah, blah, blah. It's not that scary. But anytime
The Exorcist is overhyped. Exorcist is a masterpiece, but Exorcist fits in with Brando and Kubrick. No movie is as good as The Exorcist is.
I will argue with you that I think some movies, it's not the fault of the movie it's a whole interesting concept.
It's not The Exorcist's fault. It really is 40, almost 50 years now of everybody saying The Exorcist is still the scariest movie. That by making that statement itself means that The Exorcist is not the scariest movie.
Which especially in this modern age where I agree with that, and I think that there's an interesting conversation there, and so definitely one I would love to explore.
Most people that find The Exorcist truly terrifying do not understand that the little girl is not the star of The Exorcist or the point of The Exorcist. It's all about another Damien, Father Damien, and his battle
struggle
with his own faith.
Yep.
And in the end, he wins. He wins by sacrificing, but he wins. In The Omen, spoiler alert. The good guy doesn't win in The Omen, nope. Which I read. I just found this out somewhat recently, this spin on it anyways. It's the MPAA's fault that evil wins in The Omen. There was another version where Peck's character is able to get away with killing Damien, who in the movie is his own adopted son. And obviously it's a sacrifice of an ending. It's a bummer of an ending because a child has to be killed in order to stop the destruction of the world and possibly the universe. But that was the idea. And then the MPAA objected to the idea of not only a kid being killed, but having a stepfather kill a kid, or not a stepfather, an adopted father. So they had to change it to evil wins in order to make the MPAA happier. And so they shot that scene with little Damien turning around and smiling, which apparently that shot was achieved by zooming in on the child. The child turns around, and then Richard Donner off screen starts going, "Now don't you laugh. Don't you dare laugh. You better not laugh right now." And he got that little smirk out of the kid that played Damien. And that was his ending. And I've even heard that his ending in Superman, where Superman flies past the camera and smiles, is his way of saying that power has shifted and that good is...
I've never heard that. That's interesting.
Yes. I don't know if there's truth to that, but considering how self-referential Donner is from film to film. I mean, almost every film has a reference to some other film he did. Not in a multiverse way, more in a cameo sort of way.
Yeah.
But it would not surprise me at all that Richard Donner said, you know what? Let the universe win in Superman.
That's right. Let the good guy win.
Let's give him a smile at the end.
I mean, and Superman is definitely sort of a Christ-like analogy anyways. Like, if that's way too heavy to get into this Richard Donner topic. But yeah, it's definitely a film though. Like, it's funny. I was thinking about this recently too. There's like a whole class struggle thing. A lot of like in that movie, like they're wealthy, powerful couple. A lot of these 70s, the heroes of these 70s horror films were they're intellectuals, college professors. There's a lot of them were wealthy. Like, it's just such a weird thing because those like these days, like I don't know if it's like we don't want to. It's just a weird thing I've noticed where like modern films are more about more common people. In fact, it's a lot of like people are like impoverished or going with struggles, and then they're dealing with the supernatural thing. But in the 70s, a lot of it were these like sort of like affluent or successful people, young
organizations like the church.
Yeah, so. Which is a weird thing I've noticed. But yeah, anyways, I definitely think, though, like, everything about the Omen work. In fact, it's on my short list of films that, like, I personally can't say anything negative about. I mean, there's nothing I would change, no casting I would change. Film works for me on so many levels. It's truly haunting. It's truly creepy. I think the pacing of it is perfect. Again, I think it might be slower for modern audiences, maybe, or people who have, I don't know. I think there's a whole MTV generation thing, the MTV of quick cuts and stuff. And I don't know if I believe that carte blanche for everybody, but I do think like movies like The Fast and the Furious and that kind of editing has made people it's hard to go back and watch older films. But to me, I think the pace of it moves so perfectly. There's never a dull moment. There's always like tension being built. The scene when they go to like the car safari and all the animals start going bananas, the monkeys and stuff. That's such a dumb. If I try to explain that scene to somebody, it probably sounds kind of dumb and not scary. But God damn, that scene gets under my skin every time I see it. I think it's the way Donner directed it. Again, I don't want to turn this whole podcast into I talk about the Omen. But anyways, I love the movie. What about you, Devin?
Oh, it's a masterpiece. I mean, you've been to my first apartment. I had an original teaser poster for the Omen up on my wall. It's long been one of my favorite things. Even the remake I saw on 666 on June 606 when it came out. It's just such a well-rounded movie. You're right. And I wouldn't change any of the casting. And technically on a day-to-day, just throw something on to enjoy it level, I will put on The Omen before The Exorcist every single time.
I probably would too, honestly. Probably would too.
It's got my favorite, to be fair to Suspiria, it's got my second favorite hanging scene. But it does have my favorite falling off a banister scene, my favorite impaling scene, and my favorite decapitation in cinema history. So when a horror movie has that and it's not a slasher movie,
that's right.
That's saying something. And I also love Donner directed that decapitation scene in a way he actually counted it out. It's one of the most famous decapitation scenes in any movie.
Yeah.
The great actor David Warner, flat of glass flies down, chops off his head rises into the air and spins.
Yep.
And Donner cut it by he covered his eyes as the decapitation happens and then counted out the number of seconds he thought that most people would feel like they were safe to open their eyes again, and made sure that the head spinning in air in slow motion lasted just a little bit longer than that.
That's so great.
So that nobody could hide from that shot. And I've also
that is brilliant.
David Warner got to take home his own severed head, which he can't even watch the scene. He's too freaked out watching the scene. But he took the severed head home with him. And I think this is true. He lost it in a divorce. His ex-wife took his severed head.
Motherfucker, how dare you? You don't take a man's severed head. What's wrong with you?
I would almost think that it must have been like an amicable divorce where he was jokingly like, here, honey, take my head. I mean, I don't know. I don't know anything about David Warner personally. I would like to, actually. I would really like to look up a biography or something, because he's just one of those people that is always great.
Absolutely.
So maybe it was a bad divorce. I don't know. But The Omen was certainly a great movie. If we want to keep things kind of on the inside of the fantasy realm, do you have anything quickly to say about Lady Hawk or any of the
So weirdly, this might be the thing I talk about the most outside of maybe one other movie. Well, that's not true.
I didn't expect that.
So, but because I have feelings about this. So you know how we were talking about verisimilitude?
Yes. Oh, and by the way, that was The Omen was the movie made before Superman, in which he used verisimilitude to make the Omen.
Brilliantly. Yeah, and the thing is, it works so well in Superman. It works so well in The Omen, and it's one of those rare instances where it can happen where you have a brilliant director. It's just not the right director for a certain property. And I think, first off, it was a movie. First off, I have this weird association because in my early 30s-ish, a while ago, I sort of misremembered that movie having more fantastical elements to it. So actually, I think it was either Excalibur or Dragon. I watched one fantasy movie thinking it was like a movie. I was like, oh shit, no, this isn't the movie I thought it was. Oh, you know what? It's got to be Lady Hawk. Let me watch Lady Hawk. And I watched Lady Hawk and I was like, no, this isn't the movie I remembered either. No, here's the thing is, Lady Hawk is I think it's underappreciated. I think, first off, Gabby, my wife, is right there with me, where I think I would watch Rutger Hauer do anything. I think he's one of the most infinitely interesting actors, especially with the projects that he took. But I just find him so interesting. I think he's such an interesting looking dude, and I think he had an interesting career. I think he was just
his voice just
a little left of center.
Yeah, right. Something about his voice. It's especially when he does an American accent. His American accent sounds like he learned how to speak English by watching Paul Newman movies, because there's a weird sort of Paul Newman-y cadence to it that's just off.
I was gonna say it's so impossible. Even when it's so impossible to place his accent, especially because a lot of people aren't familiar with Scandinavian accent. Yeah, exactly. But anyways, I think he's really cool. I think Michelle Pfeiffer, I think it was only her second or third movie, but she's Michelle Pfeiffer. She's enigmatic and she's so interesting. And I'll be honest, I watched it as a kid because I liked Matthew Broderick. In fact, I was a big Matthew Broderick fan. Biloxi Blues. Like, I always thought he was, I feel like he was one of those guys that suffered because he was so memorable as a specific character, as Ferris Bueller, because Ferris Bueller is such a brilliantly written character that he really did well with.
But he's so unlike any other character Broderick played.
Exactly. And Biloxi Blues, he's playing the exact opposite character. And in this, he's playing, he probably honestly was, Lady Hawk is a very interesting casting. It has a whole interesting story anyways, but the casting for this movie, for Lady Hawk, was very, very interesting. It was going to be, at one point they wanted Sean Connery. Kurt Russell was going to do it, and then he backed out. And thought it was going to be embarrassing.
He was close to doing it.
Yeah, it was literally, he was ready to film it, but then he saw himself in like all the armor and stuff. He was like, this looks ridiculous. I have to back out of this. But more interesting than that is, Broderick's character was Dustin Hoffman. There's multiple people, but he plays this French, supposed to be playing this like French thief. He doesn't have a French accent. In fact, he sounds like Ferris Bueller, and it's really weird. So it's just like, he might have been a little miscast, but I remember liking the movie as a kid. And I think my mom might have been a fan. But
this is cute. The accents only had to have verisimilitude, James.
That's right, exactly.
he wasn't French, but he sounded vaguely British, and
kind of gave it verisimilitude. Exactly. But it's a great love story, and it looks really nice. When I was a kid, I didn't really think about the soundtrack, and it wasn't until I watched it.
I couldn't later, stop where I was thinking about the soundtrack later. Yeah.
Yeah, and then later it's like, what the fuck is with? And then I'll come to find out it's one of the most. It's what it's most well known for is the fucking Weird Alan Parsons soundtrack, which I think if I rewatched it again and sort of, I might find it to be genius. I might see what Donner saw, because it was the thing Donner was most insistent upon was the fucking soundtrack. So the script though was way more fantastical. Like, there was far more to it. There was more like sort of fantasy elements than just that curse, which is the whole conceit, which is a great conceit. Like, the Duke puts his curse on them because he loves her. Anybody who sees her falls in love with her, but where she only can be a human at night, and during the day she's a hawk. And Rutger Hauer's character only lives by day, and at night he's a wolf, and it's this whole thing. And
yeah, the two lovers can never be together, yet they will never be apart.
Exactly, and they travel together, but
they're in each other's presence. But one's always an animal, and it switches off.
No, exactly. And the other one's a human. But so, like, it's a great premise, and it's played well enough. But like in the original script, there was all these amazing other fantasy elements that I thought could have been really interesting, especially at a time in the '80s when fantasy it's a whole, again, we could talk about fantasy films of the 80s and 70s, 80s a lot, because there was a lot of great ones. They almost never were very successful, but I wanted more out of it. I wanted the Conan novels, I wanted D&D, I wanted big fantasy elements, and if anything, it's more of like a fairy tale. And Donner didn't want it to feel like a fairy tale. He didn't want it to be like storybook. He wanted it to be very believable. And I just don't think his approach worked for Lady Hawk. In fact, I think he did it a disservice. Great looking movie, and I think the cast was strong. But I think
the color palette of the movie is really interesting.
But yeah,
I'm still not sure quite how he achieved it.
No, it's a lot of like soft focusy shit, and like I think there's a red wash over it. Like, yeah, it's got a very interesting look to it. But I don't know.
It takes place in the 1300s somewhere, but somehow, and this is no dig on Alan Parsons because I love Alan Parsons' project, but somehow the Alan Parsons music makes it feel like it takes place 100 years earlier than it actually does. Like he can make a period piece from the 1300s feel dated with that music. And
for real. Well, the thing is, like, listen to the soundtrack on its own. I'm sure it's probably a cool ass soundtrack because like I said, I like Alan Parsons' project. This sort of like, it's very 80s. The few parts, I think, if I'm not mistaken, I think you can still probably find the soundtrack. Like, you probably still buy that. I think for some reason I remember seeing it on my social media feed not that long ago, within the last year, as being available to buy. But it's just an interesting movie. It's interesting. It's more interesting about those facets of it, like the weird casting things, and then Donner's insistence about having Alan Parsons do the music because he was listening to it while scouting the locations. Is it a perfect movie? No, but I think it's a fun movie, and I think there's enough to it. There's this weird thing where I actually really like Rutger Hauer's look. There's this very important manga, not the anime is not good, but this manga called Berserk by one of the greatest mangaka or manga artists of all time, Kenta Miura, who he just passed away. But Berserk is considered like the magnum opus of like manga. I mean, it's just this huge, violent, dark, but brilliant, fantasy series. But I swear to God, at one point, Berserk wears this helmet. I swear to God, it's inspired by Lady Hawk because it's like the exact same helmet he wears. And I don't think it's an actual historical helmet, which is just a weird thing. But anyways, pisses me off that there were so many fantasy movies of this period that pulled back from the fantasy elements and didn't want to embrace those things because they wanted to make it more relatable. But again, dude turns into a fucking wolf. Like, we buy it, like whatever. But I don't think Richard Donner wanted to do it. I think he was offered it, and I don't know. But do you have feelings about this movie?
It's been a long time since I've really seen it. I do remember being impressed by its visuals in a way that is hard to really explain because it's not mind-blowing.
No.
Like, it's not LSD kind of visuals, nope. Trippy.
It's just very pretty.
It has a really weird color palette that's obviously manufactured. It's not, they were doing something chemically with the film or something. I don't know. And I remember that about it. I remember, of course, Broderick is not great per se, but fun. Rutger Hauer is fantastic. And actually Michelle Pfeiffer is fantastic.
Yeah.
I think that this is what to expect from a Richard Donner fantasy film. This is a fantasy film with the verisimilitude. He didn't want to go directly to, toil, bubble, toil and trouble, sort of witches and curses and stuff. There's mysticism, there's magic in the movie, but he's presenting you a world in which this magic can appear real, to where like characters are told this heartbreaking love story between the hawk and the wolf, or their human incarnations, and they seem less blown away by how fucking crazy that is, and more interested in what a love story that is, which means that this is a world in which things like this are believable. No, I don't think it's his best work, but I can't imagine who else would have done. I mean, Ridley Scott, maybe. I don't know who would have done the better job. I don't think anyone else would have done a better job. I
think Donner, if you asked Donner if he was still alive, with his feelings, he probably would admit that it's not his best movie, and that, I think it's this whole, if you're a fan of fantasy and that stuff, I think it's a different argument anyways. But I also think
it's not my favorite genre, by the way. And I think I like this movie because it's actually pretty funny. So
I mean,
I think that's what I don't appreciate the fantasy elements of it at all. That's not my bag.
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah, it's funny because I love
funny script.
Yeah. I mean, I grew up even before superheroes and comic books and all these other nerd endeavors. My first love, because I still remember going to the Ukaipa Public Library and going to this whole like Renaissance, well, like knights and dragons, sword and sorcery. They had this whole thing about like fantasy. It was a whole like fantasy festival at my local library, and I'd already liked knights, tales of stories of like knights and stuff, but seeing like a real suit of armor and real swords and people in like costumes and stuff, and a whole little section about Tolkien and stuff, like it just blew my mind. And I think it was actually very, I don't talk about it actually a lot, but I was thinking about it earlier today that it was sort of really, this one experience was so important to my development as a nerd. But anyways, as a fantasy fan, there's not a lot of great fantasy films, but it's just one of those movies though that I just sort of, I saw it probably on HBO or whatever as a kid, and was like, oh, that was pretty fun and stuff. And then probably watched it again in my late teens and be like, man, this isn't as fun as I thought it was. And then sort of not seeing it, and then sort of just remembering it as a different movie. But I love Rutger Hauer. And again, she's, I honestly, the only thing I really remembered was seeing an ad for the movie. It must have been HBO or maybe a different pay channel, but they would show you as like the thing like coming up next, and you'd see the thing for the movie before they played it.
Oh yeah.
And seeing Michelle Pfeiffer's face and just being like just like twinkly, like just she was so pretty, and the way it was just very, very like pleasant feeling. It looked pleasant. But yeah, it's not the greatest movie, but it's an interesting movie. And I do think it's better than maybe it's gotten its reputation. I just feel like, and most of my love comes for one, Rutger Hauer in it, and how and I think Rutger Hauer's relationship with like that sort of like big brother, little brother, or maybe even father son relationship they have, although I don't feel like the age difference was too great in that movie. Well, maybe it was, but there's a scene where like, Rutger Hauer is basically like just chastising and being very mean to Matthew Broderick, and he's got all these Matthew Broderick ends up having all these like scratches on his chest. He's like, what is that from? And then that priest guy or whatever was like, oh, he got those from trying to save you when you were a wolf. And I remember being like really touched by that scene, being like, oh, like, because that's when he sort of realized like he's not just some annoying ass like kid thief. He actually, I don't know. There's just a really and that's Donner's specialty though, and that's really why the one strength is like Donner always knew how to get balance, like the humor, and then he knew how to get your heart involved and get your feelings involved and make it make you sort of attached to the characters. Not a perfect movie, but like I said, I will probably end up buying, now that we've talked about it so much. I'm like, I'll probably end up buying it.
Yeah, I'd like to see it again myself, actually. So are there any other let's see, we're in what, 1985 territory with
83, something like that. 84, 85, maybe 85. Well, yeah, let's talk about the other movie from 1985. The one movie probably that's, again, he's got some amazing, important movies to me, especially at this half of his career. Obviously, mentioned Superman was a huge importance to me. The Omen was more of something I got into later. That wasn't a film I saw as a kid. My parents weren't watching a ton of, by the time I was renting horror movies as a kid, which was still very young, it was more stuff that was contemporary stuff in the early to mid 80s. So I wasn't going too far back. So the Omen, I probably saw the Omen on TV and liked it, but it wasn't as important to me. Not nearly as important to my childhood as probably the greatest kids movie ever made, The Goonies. Now, I will preface this by saying The Goonies has become that movie where its fandom might ruin the movie for some people, because at least there was a period a few years ago where the fandom had just become very obnoxious online. If you're into online culture, you might know what I'm saying, where it was just like, anyways, doesn't matter. But The Goonies was the first movie as a kid that my mom loved, that me and my brothers loved, and that we would, Devin, I know when I say this is going to sound unbelievable, but if you know this to be true, especially because you know how my mom was with movies she liked, like, which is another movie on this list, which we will talk about in a second. I watched The Goonies not only every day of my life, probably for 5 years, and I mean that 100% seriously. A day did not go by where we didn't watch The Goonies at least once. On weekends, we would literally watch it back to back. And my mom loved the movie. She thought it was hysterical. She loved Chunk, which, I know you probably, this has come out recently, but Richard Donner, one of the things to talk about him as a human being, Richard Donner apparently paid, and I think I actually heard this before it came out posthumously, but Richard Donner paid for Chunk to go to college. Yeah. One of our friends actually went to college with Chunk, which is a funny story. Chunk was their like college class president or something. I don't know the full story, but one of our friends went to college with the actor who played Chunk. But the Goonies is phenomenal. Everything about it, you had Steven Spielberg producing it, so it had that Spielberg shine. The amazing cast, the soundtrack, the Cyndi Lauper amazing soundtrack, which was also had 2 incredible music videos, also directed by Richard Donner, which also featured Captain Lou Albano. Anyways, I cannot say how important this movie was to my childhood. First off, you had kids swearing, which I love that. I love that they talked like real little kids and weren't like, it wasn't the fucking, Brady Bunch. It wasn't Our Gang. It wasn't, these were real contemporary mid 80s kids who were dropping F-bombs and talking about dicks.
It was done really realistically too, because the kids kind of had their own spin on it. First off, yep. I found out recently, they all swear strategically at points that are easy for television stations to cut out or drown out their words. Like there's usually a car chase or water or something going on when the kids swear. I thought that was funny. But evidenced by, I can't remember the actor's real name, the kid that played Data.
Oh, yeah. I don't know his name off the top of my head either, so don't feel bad.
Well, his mother didn't want him swearing. And so when his big scene came up, he says, "Holy SHIT," which is just the most kid thing in the world.
Yeah.
It's more magical because they swear. Because now I'm relating to these kids.
Ke Hua Kwan, which I don't probably butchering that, but yeah. Ke Hua Kwan as Data. But yes, exactly. You're 100% right. Yes, absolutely. And that's the thing is, especially like, first off, there's a point in history, which is so weird that the sentence is going to come out of my mouth, when Corey Feldman was the coolest person on the planet. Like legitimately, like his talent was unbelievable because he had so much charisma on screen. He stole every fucking scene he's in, not just in this, but in multiple movies.
But it's all within this period. I mean, it really does not, it's 84, 85, 86. It's like this, Friday the 13th, 4, and Stand By Me, those 3 coming out right now. It was, by the time he was hooking up with Corey Haim, it was over.
Yeah. But still, I mean, he like, I would say, like, I
know you're a fan of the Corys, and I'm not going to turn down watching License to Drive either. I would say, a Little Dream.
I was going to say, Buy Dream a Little Dream, which I still think has its own appeal. But yeah, he was just, anyways, this cast, first off, fucking Sean Astin, Josh Brolin, fucking Martha Plimpton, who's phenomenal, never gets enough credit, fucking Joe Pantoliano, fucking Robert Davi, John Matuzak. Exactly. It just, dude, it's so good, dude. It's so good. Pirates, fucking just, dude, there was a mythology. I mean, people, I don't understand, like, when there was like this whole thing, I think it was in Starlog magazine or whatever, they were the first to say, like, hey, there was this whole octopus scene that was taken out of this movie, and there's a whole, like, all these different things that, like, the movie had its mythology, and, like, for a long time, like, I want to see this, crazy octopus scene or whatever, and, like,
but yeah, I think it was literally, like, I don't know if this is true. It probably isn't. There's probably no way this is possible. But growing up, when kids started to learn about, like, the octopus scene, it started to, at least at my school, like, it was like one theater had it and the other theater didn't.
Right.
I think that's bullshit.
Like, I think I remember the same thing, though, honestly. Like, that same, like, that rumor or whatever, yeah.
But the octopus scene does exist because it has been released as a special feature, and because it was in, and might still be in, all of the TV versions of the movie where they've had to cut and rearrange other things.
Yeah.
There's a couple of scenes. There's actually never been a quote-unquote uncut version of Goonies ever released to video, whether it be DVD, VHS, any of it. It's always been the theatrical cut, but there's all these other things that we know exist, things that were filmed, things that have somehow aired on TV, odd familiarity of things that I know aren't in the movie, but I'm sure I've seen. It really is. It's one of those movies. It's the movie itself is mythical, and I think you're right. I think that's part of why it has such a serious following.
Absolutely. I've actually been able to visit both Astoria, Oregon, Cannon Beach, like a few like locations where they filmed. I've been there, and it has that same feeling, which is sort of magical because even just the setting is so important. I remember as a kid being like I wanted to live there. And, you know, like, even though in the movie it's sad, like people losing their homes and stuff, but like this is this weird, like, it's like the mountains, but it's also the beach. It's like, and then you just come to find out, oh, it's just, that's what the, you know, the coast of Oregon looks like. That's the coast between Oregon and Washington. Like, that's what it looks like. It's gorgeous, but it's also like, I don't know, just very magical feeling, that Pacific North area, the Pacific Northwest. But it's just, man, it's just so good. And, you know, Spawn, you know, some of these people went on to have pretty fascinating careers. Some of them didn't, but it just, you know, it was a movie, I'm not exaggerating, I had, at one point in my life, I'd seen literally hundreds of times. And it never, I put on every day. I could recite it verbatim. And like, but it just never got old. It's just the characters are so funny and interesting. And, you know, the bad guys, you know, Ma Fratelli and her gang, like the bad guys were so like legitimately hateable, but they were also a little sort of sympathetic because they had their own dynamic. You know, it's such a weird fucking movie. There's this giant mutant named Sloth who wears a Superman shirt, which is funny because of
it's an in-joke. Yes, it was definitely an in-joke.
There's just so much there that's such weird choices, like, but it works so perfectly. It's a movie. I mean, you'll never see another film I don't honestly like it. It was this sort of like, there's almost like an adventure serial. It's almost like, it had like almost like an Indiana Jones type adventure serial vibe, but for these swearing kids, and it's just fucking bizarre, but I love it to death. And I mean,
well, yeah, even though it's a Richard Donner film, it also is kind of
Spielberg.
almost the very definition of an Amblin movie.
Yeah,
there is no Stranger Things without this
That's
movie.
100%.
I grew up with it too. I've seen it a lot of times. I haven't seen it anywhere near as many times as you have. My experience with the over and over and over again was for a while. I had the read along cassette tape with the storybook, and that became a regular, like, fall asleep to the Goonies sort of thing in 1985. So I probably heard the story read aloud more than I've seen the movie. No octopus scene in the read aloud storybook version, by the way. For anyone out there that remembers those, you'll know it's time to turn the page.
I love it. I love like the He-Man ones. I had some Disney ones, but
I had some Star Trek ones, and those are fun. I had some Superman ones.
Yeah, same.
But yeah, there's really nothing else like Goonies, even in that time period. I think what might come closest is the Monster Squad, but it's
years later,
it's still a different vibe, you know.
Yep. Like, but I mean, again, both of those films. Again, I think I was just lucky enough to be that magical age to live in that time frame, because both of those movies were so important to me. You know, it's just the perfect time to be a kid, man. When we're making cool ass movies for kids, where kids are like the heroes, but they're not annoying. Like, you know, they're, you know, kind of smart assy kids, but also not annoying smart assy. Like, legitimately still likable, just kind of like real kids, basically. Anyways, but yes, I mean, I think you were dead on. It's literally, I've literally said the same thing, that the only real spiritual cousin I could come up with was also, so just instead of fighting pirates, they're fighting the universe monsters. So.
Now, another one that Donner did in the 80s that I think time has been kinder to, but initially audiences, I don't think got that into it. At least critics didn't get too into it. And I think it's one that people forget is a Richard Donner movie, and that is Scrooge with Bill Murray.
Dude, I cannot. It is such an no. Let me actually take that back. In the last few years with online culture, I think it's become now. But dude, that movie is so fucking great and so weird and so weirdly dark, but also hysterical. The cast is great. It's really Bill Murray, going full Bill Murray, especially for that period. But, you know, very dark holiday comedy, especially when you consider the other holiday comedies that were coming out, you know, like in the late 80s. This one is very, like, it's still a comedy. It still has a lot of heart to it. In fact, I swear to God, the ending literally chokes me up every time. Just because it's like Bill Murray balances sentimentality with a fucking sense of humor better than I think any actor ever, where he's going to take the air out a little. Whenever it gets even a little too sentimental, he'll take the air out a little bit. And it's perfectly, because though it doesn't go into like fucking sappy fucking. But anyways, great movie, phenomenal movie, great cast. I'm a big Bobcat fan, and just like he's so great in his small role in it. You got Buster Poindexter. The cast is so good. The movie's so good.
You got Robert fucking Mitchum's in that movie. You know, it's
playing a very un-Robert Mitchum role, but still great. He's still good.
Yeah. Apparently, Mitchum wasn't sure he was going to do it, and so Richard Donner set Bill Murray loose on him for like an hour, and then turned on the charm, and then Mitchum agreed to do it. My guess is that the charm probably included a joint and a lighter.
Probably,
knowing Robert Mitchum, but yeah, it really is. It's become one of my favorite Christmas movies. I've been trying to get my stepdaughter to see it, but it's so hard to get her to watch anything. And there's so many Christmas movies that I want her to see. Christmas movies are a genre unto their own. And I have a couple of perennials that I watch every year, and Scrooged is one of them. It has been for a very, very long time. As an adaptation of the Charles Dickens story, A Christmas Carol, it's actually pretty faithful, all things considered. It's really kind of the perfect concept of what a reimagining of classic literature would be. That Scrooge would now be in charge of network television, and and that there would be, Cratchit type character, is this woman who played by Alfred Woodard, who really goes the extra mile to make this asshole happy, and she's got her own family at home that's got problems, and you even get the Tiny Tim factor in there. We get two Tiny Tims for the price of one, really, because you get the kind of the meaningful Tiny Tim storyline with the little kid that hasn't spoken, I think, since his father passed away. But then you also get Mary Lou Retton playing Tiny Tim in
as Mary Lou Retton.
Yes, in this TV event based on Christmas Carol. So you kind of get two Christmas carols for one. And Karen Allen is also really great as the lost love, and that's something that really, I don't remember Christmas Carol really having a whole lot of real lost love elements to it, and maybe I just need to go back and reread my Dickens, but I don't think of any of the other adaptations of Scrooge as being a love story where he's trying to get back the girl that he misused along the way and has to redeem himself. It actually seems to be a common theme amongst Bill Murray movies from the period too. That and Groundhog Day are both about becoming the better person to win the love of his life. But yeah, I just wanted to make sure that I don't think Richard Donner gets, I think even people that give credit to the movie Scrooged as a Christmas movie do not give the credit to Richard Donner, who clearly worked really hard on this and created something that is both sentimental and satirical.
100% agree.
Now, I'm kind of thinking there's definitely one from the early 80s that I'd like to touch on at some point. In fact, I might just say now, because I doubt you've seen Inside Moves.
No, but I know Inside Moves, and I know it's fucking Depression on Wheels. I know it doesn't look like a Richard Donner movie, but I still remember when I first came across it, thinking like it just looked like the least fun. I mean, the whole point is it's supposed to be like a dark comedy but it just looks so it just looks such a bummer. I was like, there's no way I'm watching this, but yeah, I do know of it.
I had never seen it. I watched it recently for this specifically because I felt like I needed to see his take on an actual full-scale drama. Donner was really he was a man who wore many hats, a man of many styles, and he did a lot of genres, and some of them only once. And character study / melodrama, his contribution to that was this movie Inside Moves, and I'm so glad I saw it, dude. I do highly recommend this. It's on HBO Max, I believe. It sounds depressing as hell, and there are moments, where you're not feeling too good, but for the most part, it's actually a pretty uplifting movie. By the end, I think a lot of movies from that era, especially from that era, this being 1980, would have deliberately taken it to like some really downer areas, and I don't think this movie ever really quite goes there. I think the intent of the movie is to fill you up more with like uplifting human spirit,
exactly.
It's about recovery, it's about coping, and it's about, for anyone that doesn't know it, it's about disabilities. It's about a guy who via failed suicide attempt ends up doing some real serious damage to his body. He's not paralyzed, but John Savage is playing the lead, and it's an actor who really never got his due. I wondered actually last night while I was looking at John Savage in this movie and thinking like, why wasn't he bigger? I mean, he's in so many, Hair and The Deer Hunter, and he's in so many big movies. He must have been some kind of a jerk or something. And so I looked him up on IMDb or to see if I could find any stories about why he wasn't bigger than he was. And like for this huge chunk of the late 80s and early 90s, he went to South Africa and helped Nelson Mandela personally in ending apartheid. So I'm like, okay, I guess that's a good reason to not be, making movies in 1989. So yeah, John Savage, cool guy, just discovered. But he's great in this, and so is David Morse in his first film, and he also even got back what's his name, Harold Russell, who was the World War II vet with the two hooks that won an Academy Award for the best years of our lives. Almost 40 years later, after he won the Academy Award for that movie, Donner talked him into being in this movie because it was meant to be uplifting for people with disabilities, and he agreed to do it. Man, he's hysterical. He's one of the guys they know in the bar, and he's everybody. If you watch
the trailer, he's the point of he's like he's one that always is the funny one-liners.
He's one of them. They all actually have some big moments, and yes, it's 1980, so aside from Harold Russell, you're going to see a lot of able-bodied actors playing disabled characters in this. But that was the time, and it doesn't diminish the message. It's a feel-good movie that starts off with a suicide.
One of the funniest lines, because I think it was like, I forget which website, but the only reason I knew it before I rewatched the trailer before this. It was literally the only bit of research I did before this, just because I was like, it was one of like his early like Twinkie and all the earlier stuff. I was like, I need salt and pepper. I was like, when you brought him up, I have no idea what this is, or I've never seen it ever. But anyways, so I remember like some website had it like 20 most underappreciated dark comedies or whatever. It was on some list, and I remember seeing it and then looking it up and being like, it's fucked up. But so I rewatched the trailer just to sort of like, I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I remember booking this up before, but the one line from the trailer, because again, I was like, man, this is depression on wheels. But again, that knowing obviously that's the whole point, is like a bunch of people who are broke and still find the humor and friendship of it. All of those cliche Hollywood message, I think. But it's like, man, he's like, man, you really fucked up the order. You're supposed to get crippled and then try to kill yourself. Yeah. And I remember being like, that is a very funny but very dark line. So, but very interesting. Maybe I will watch it. I mean, the thing is, like, it was like there was a lot of directors in the late 70s or throughout the 70s who were like taking a dark subject and trying to make a comedy out of it and stuff. And there's some great movies there. And I told you off podcast, but I recently had a brain injury. Within the last few days, I had a very severe brain injury. So I can't recall any of them right now, but I know, like, I know that I've seen a lot of films that took a sort of a dark premise and, did something fun or interesting, or, managed to eke out both a humorous movie and a feel-good movie out of dark subjects. So, and I've enjoyed films like that in the past, but I just, again, revisiting the trailer, I was like, man, this looks good. And the whole thing with Savage's characters, like, there's like a love triangle thing, and I was just like, man, they're going all out and trying to eke out every possible ounce of drama in this. But
it's cheesy as hell, but it's got verisimilitude. You totally believe it within the context of this particular story. You believe everything he's laying out for you. You will never be in the mood for this movie, so I'm going to tell people, just force yourself to watch Inside Moves on HBO Max, because you will be rewarded. Don't wait until you're in the mood to watch an early 80s dark comedy about recovery from disabilities. Yeah. Were there any movies from Donner in the 90s that you wanted to talk about?
They all go back to one movie from the late 80s I want to talk about. I will say, I'm going to be very upfront. To me, and for me personally, Scrooged, and then the movie he made right after Scrooge. Basically, the post-1989, for me specifically, he has a very hard downturn where, the last movies of his... Although his very last movie, did I watch it on a plane? I forget where I watched it. Was I at a party? I don't even know where I watched it. It was someplace where I was sort of distracted, but I liked it well enough.
But about 16 Blocks?
16 Blocks, yeah.
Yeah, I liked it too.
I thought it wasn't phenomenal, but it was, great cast and an interesting, sort of thriller-y kind of thing. But we've talked about all of the other big ones. Let's talk about the sort of second franchise he sort of created, and the one that he directed throughout consistently. Let's talk about Lethal Weapon.
All right, let's get into Lethal Weapon.
Let's do it. So when I talked about how growing up, there was Goonies, Tremors, which I think I've brought up in this podcast before. But the one movie my mom watched every single day for much longer than the 3 or 4 year period I mentioned about Goonies, and that's Lethal Weapon, which is probably my mom's favorite movie of all time. She was a giant Mel Gibson fan. We will not talk about Mel Gibson's too much on this, but sort of this, like, the quintessential buddy cop movie. I mean, there were buddy cop movies before it, but it really sort of hammered home all of the cliches.
100%. This is when, like, everybody was a buddy cop after this.
Yeah, after this, it went. Everybody tried to rip this. And again,
this and Die Hard are probably the most important action movies of our lifetime, and they came out in like these 2 years, 87 and 89. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely.
87, 88.
Absolutely. And as much as I will give Donner credit for the success of Lethal Weapon, I think equal credit goes to Shane Black. I think it's Shane's, as great as the directing is, as great as the acting is, I think you take you can take all those different elements with a lesser script and it just becomes forgettable. Shane Black's script was so exactly what Shane Black was so good at, which is balancing legitimate action, sort of these high adrenaline films with flawed, interesting characters, very like funny dialogue, very zippy, quick, fast-paced dialogue, balancing act between being tongue-in-cheek and being very not tongue-in-cheek, which is almost an impossible task. It's funny, somebody pointed out recently that Danny Glover was only 42 or 43 when they filmed that, so I am older than Danny Glover was when he said, "I'm getting too old for this shit," which is very depressing. And
well, he was playing 50, but yeah,
he was playing. That's right, he was playing older. But again,
makes me feel old is that Mel Gibson was 30 when he made.
That's right, exactly.
That makes me feel ancient.
Yes. As much as I do love the first one, and the first one is hands down the quote unquote best of the four. I brought this up in a different podcast, but I'm going to put the blame on Richard Donner because he directed it, but I was obsessed. The amount of hours spent infuriated about the concept of diplomatic immunity and how fucking unfair it was, and how just the concept infuriated me as a kid, and how I thought it was this big problem in the world. People with it just getting diplomatic immunity, killing people, and just not being able to get it. Anyways. But
I knew it was going to come. My friend Ryan Peary, if you're out there, Ryan, it was one of the things that he mentioned when I sent him the R.I.P. Richard Donner. He's one of my close friends that I always let him know when I hear something and vice versa. And I did R.I.P. Donner, and he says the man who introduced the world to diplomatic immunity.
Immunity is true. Again, I'm glad I'm not alone because it really upset me. Let's talk about the fact that the first off, you have this action movie, you have this hero of an action franchise, and usually you're thinking Clint Eastwood, your Charles Bronson, these sort of these pillars of not only masculinity but of the strong sense of justice and right and wrong, and just men of virtue. Fucking here you have a guy who's dealing with mental health issues and fucking suicide, suicide, depression, and he's also there's just so many elements to the characters, and Riggs and Murtaugh, while being very cartoonish by the end of the series, were very, very interesting characters in the original film. It's a movie that has become synonymous with just classic action films, but I also think it's a little bit of a disservice because I think it's a little bit more than that. I think yes, the other films become sort of just very cliche action films, but which isn't a bad. I love action. I do another podcast, dedicated to.
I enjoy all of the Lethal Weapons, but the sequels are by nature the very definition of diminishing returns on a sequel.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. But can we also first off, Tom Atkins is in this movie. Small role, but I mean, any time Tom Atkins is in a movie, it needs to be brought up.
It's the reason why I always think of Tom Atkins when I think of eggnog.
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Well, I love it. But it's always weird how people forget that the villain in this movie was Gary fucking Busey. It seems to always be forgotten. That how does that get forgotten?
Because he's so good too. He's so creepy. It is just so. That was intense. My idea of what mercs were for a long time too. It's exactly someone as crazy as Gary Busey, and Donner was smart enough to cast him because he had to get somebody who he felt could be intimidating to Mel Gibson. And Gary Busey, pre-accident, I don't know if it was post Coke yet or not.
Yeah, exactly.
I still don't know if we're post Coke yet.
Exactly.
Busey's mind will always be a mystery to me, but I feel comforted that it will always be a mystery to Gary Busey as well.
Busey, exactly.
And but yeah, the fact that that Gary Busey would be the individual that could scare Mel Gibson, I love that.
Yeah, man, it's I'm not gonna say it's a perfect movie, but it's definitely one of the all-time best action films. Definitely the best buddy cop. And there's some great buddy cop movies, but it's
it's a masterpiece.
It's a masterpiece.
Simple.
Just it's a masterpiece of casting too. Because first of all, I always think Danny Glover is so underrated. Predator 2, which also has Gary Busey.
Also Busey.
Yeah, also is Gary Busey is kind of a villain, is an antagonist anyways. But yeah, I always thought Danny Glover's so great. But that dynamic of Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs and Danny Glover as Roger Murtaugh, that's where the magic is really happening, because they're such different characters at different points in their life. They're both great at what they do. They're both legitimately I could see both these guys as these hard-boiled cops, but they're also both really funny and have a great sense of humor. Danny Glover definitely has his own sort of this dry, exasperated sense of humor, which does by the end of the series become more and more cartoonish, but so does Mel Gibson. But yeah, it's great. There's a scene in it though, which is there's a lot. Okay, look, every family is different, but it's such a specific thing to have. Your dad is taking a bath, balls and cock out in the bath. It's not even like it's a bubble bath. He's just balls and cock out. Not that you see Danny Glover's balls and cock, but in the movie, he's just in the tub, balls and cock out. And here come his kids, and I'm like, what? And then later on, he's on the shitter.
It would ruin my fucking birthday if my family did that.
Thanks,
That's
dude,
what they're doing. They're bringing him in a cake, and I swear to God, I would be like, "Get the fuck out of here!"
Exactly.
I'm not eating any of your cake.
Exactly.
Just leave me alone the rest of the goddamn day now.
Exactly. Exactly.
Taking a fucking bath.
Exactly, dude. It's just so weird. It's such a weird choice. But again, I think I read an article once about how that whole franchise just was almost like it was made out to fucking embarrass that character. Like how every film is this really embarrassing scene for poor Danny Glover, Roger Murtaugh, the character. But anyways,
but it doesn't always come from the Riggs character though. His daughter does
not
a
necessarily
condom commercial in the
That's
second
right.
one, and
yeah, exactly.
I always thought it was cool. As the franchise went on, Glover's or Murtaugh's family is always played by the same people. Like this, they weren't pulling they could have very easily have kept the kids the same age.
Exactly.
By just recycling actors like they did in the Vacation series, for example. But they showed the Murtaugh family growing up and older. And that was kind of a cool thing that I'm sure Donner insisted on. I'm sure the studio was not entirely in favor of.
But I mean, it makes sense though, because you're the character as the film's going. They are getting older, and their characters are developing and stuff. And that's actually where a lot of the interesting things, those subplots, happen. Especially by eventually she's dating Chris Rock's character, who's like a cop, and so I mean that's really. And I mean, also it's weird. Like his wife is played by the amazing singer Darlene Love, who is one of my favorite, written multiple amazing Christmas songs, but the amazing singer Darlene Love, who's also plays his wife, plays Roger Murtaugh's wife. Now, obviously, I really like the sequel of the direct sequel. I will argue that as a kid, I liked Joe Pesci's inclusion. I don't know if I feel the same way as an adult. I don't think I really appreciate his character. In the second one, it's fine. I think going throughout the films, it's a little this has become he's more annoying than he is funny. But what's weird is, so I was just having this conversation maybe 3 or 4 days ago that I don't think Renee Russo gets enough credit. I think she's such a great actress, and I don't know if you're as big of a fan of the movie Nightcrawler as I am, but it's one of my favorite movies of the last 20. It might be my single favorite. I love the movie Nightcrawler. Renee Russo's in it, and she's plays an older woman in it. This older TV, this TV news, not producer, but showrunner. I forget what the term, but anyways, she's great in it. But I remember being like, dude, she was to put her up against, first of all, to give a love interest to Riggs, to Mel Gibson, that can kind of sort of stand up to him and be her own badass character and really sort of kind of give as good as she can take kind of thing. And I just thought she was such a great character. And she's weirdly Rene Russo's character in my brain is one of those people talk about strong women roles, and I'm not I'm not kidding when I say the very first two that always come into my mind are Ellen Ripley, because she's the fucking greatest of all time, not just female heroine, just Ellen Ripley is the baddest motherfucker in action film history. But then after her is Rene Russo's character. I just think she was such a great character, and Rene Russo played her so well, and she was so she's just a really great female action character. And I don't feel like she ever gets enough credit. And I thought she was a great addition to the story, and then their progression. But anyways, that's a weird tangent, but I just had to give Rene Russo some love.
Absolutely. Obviously, probably worth saying that we're probably never going to get Lethal Weapon 5 now.
No.
This is probably a good thing. I was going to say. I don't like the circumstances, but it had been announced Richard Donner was interested in doing a Lethal Weapon 5, and Glover and Gibson were, of course, both on board. So that was a thing that was happening and will probably not happen now. I can tell you honestly, if Richard Donner had done it, I would have seen the movie. If anybody else does it, I'm going to completely skip it because there just doesn't seem to be a point to it. It kind of loses all verisimilitude if you're going to have these guys in their 80s trying to kick ass. People give Harrison Ford shit for doing Indiana Jones 5, but those were always fantasy movies. You would lose something in the translation.
I will say this though: if Shane Black were to write it and direct it, I would watch it. And I try not to support Mel Gibson films these days.
Me neither, but I would have if it had been a Donner film.
Yeah.
And I don't, I have mad respect for Shane Black. He's written some of the greatest screenplays ever, obviously, including Monster Squad, to bring that back into the conversation again. Exactly. I do not think that I would go see Shane Black's Lethal Weapon 5. I think I would skip that. I would think that movie would be beneath everybody involved. If it was Donner, I'd be curious. I wouldn't be hopeful, but I'd be curious. Yeah. Anybody else, it just seems like a cash grab.
Well, I will say, though, and I think this segues perfectly, considering some of the films Donner made at the later end of his actual productive career where he's actually making films, I don't know if I'd be so hopeful. But look,
I don't think he made it. Well, there's the Timeline movie that I never even watched, which apparently the studio butchered not once, not twice, but thrice. Before Donner could release it. So I just didn't see that one. But I don't think he made a bad one other than that in this phase of his career. Which ones are you?
Assassins is not a good movie. It's
I'm surprised. I thought you would have enjoyed Assassins.
Maybe I need to rewatch it. I didn't. I watched it once when it was brand new, or what? I might have watched it with Casey. Did I watch it with Casey? I don't know. At this point in my life, in the mid '90s, I was hanging out with Casey over at Casey's house a lot. This would have been senior year of my high school. So, but yeah, I remember watching it once and being like, nah, man. And I liked the cat. Cast was interesting. But yeah, nope. Didn't. I know my mom liked Maverick. Didn't really care for it.
I love Maverick. That's one where
I had a feeling you might have liked Maverick. Conspiracy Theory found it very annoying. I knew what they were going for.
I haven't seen it since he did. He did multiple movies. He did 6 movies with Mel Gibson, but it's also worth putting into perspective 4 of those were Lethal Weapons.
Yeah.
But yes, the two men did have like a genuine affection for one another, and like Gibson was Donner's choice for Batman when he was up for the '89 Batman, things like that.
I do have to say this though, as I'm staring at a list of his sort of breakdown of his filmography. Donner did also have a very impressive television directing career, but he did direct the ventriloquist dummy episode of Tales from the Crypt, which I did really like. So,
and he also directed the Twilight Zone with Shatner, the 20,000.
Wait, did he?
Yeah, the terror.
The Gremlin.
The one with the Gremlin. Yes.
Yeah.
That was Richard Donner. Yeah, that was. Shatner even responded to Donner's death, saying he barely remembered doing it, except for that he had a positive experience.
Oh, see, I didn't. When I was looking at it, I didn't. Nightmare 20,000 Feet. See, yes,
that's
fucking fantastic. Yeah. Anyway, I love Twilight Zone is one of my all-time favorites. So the fact that he directed 6 episodes is fucking great. Anyways, but yeah. So again, to go back to his later career, I will probably, of any of them, I might revisit. Maybe I will revisit Assassins too. I just
definitely revisit Assassins because I've seen it somewhat recently, And nobody's robbed of an Oscar for it. Let's get that out there right now. But in terms, I think time has been kind to it. I think in terms of just kind of being a fun, don't take it so seriously action movie, it's, as far as an assassin movie, it's certainly better than anything that Jason Statham's ever done, or it's better than the remake of The Mechanic. It's got a very similar plot to the original Charles Bronson Mechanic.
Yeah. But yeah,
I would say it's on par in terms of quality to the Charles Bronson Mechanic.
Now, Timeline, I don't. Have you watched it? Do you know anything about it? Or I think you said you did.
I actually fully intended to watch Timeline today. I was a little disheartened reading about the studio involvement. I always kind of knew that was a thing. It's unfortunate. It's probably one of the things that kept Donner from working much beyond that.
Yeah, I remember.
But the studio kept on pushing back the release date because they were unhappy with Donner's cut, and then they were unhappy with his second cut, and then they were like unhappy with his third cut, and eventually he ended up cutting over 20 minutes, including a prologue that apparently sets up the whole movie. So nobody liked this movie, not even the people that made it. And it's probably better to just skip over it, but I did want to watch it today. And instead, I thought, before I turned that on, I said, I just kind of want to take a look at this TV movie he did called Sarah T. Teenage Alcoholic. Is that what it's called?
I believe so, yes.
The actual title is so much cooler. Let me see. Yeah, Sarah T. Portrait of a Teenage Alcoholic, which is a TV movie about Linda Blair at 15 years old being a completely insane offer shit alcoholic, and her hookup in high school is Mark Hamill, and her dad is played by Larry Hagman, and it's just all sorts of movie of the week deliciousness, and I got hooked into that, and I decided I do not want to watch the bad Richard Donner movie. I would rather watch this, while granted depressing teenage alcoholism story, but Linda Blair's actually really good. Larry Hagman's actually really good. Mark Hamill's Mark Hamill. His better performances were a couple of years away. Yeah. But that's not his fault. His character really doesn't have much to do outside of giving her booze and then start telling her she has a problem. That was his function.
Very much TV of the week boyfriend role.
Yeah, exactly.
I just funny though. I was thinking the other day, I remember really liking the 70s-ness of Corvette Summer. Was there also a Mark Hamill pinball movie? Am I crazy? Or is that a portion of, is that a subplot of Corvette? I remember Mark Hamill in a pinball movie.
That sounds so familiar, but is it?
I guess I could Google it, but
is there a movie like Pinball Madness or something like that?
Something like, yes, that's what I think that's exactly, even maybe we might be on here or something. I guess I could just literally.
You're bringing up freshly dug up memories here. I don't know if I don't trust my own memory on this.
No. I don't think, maybe not. Oh, no. There's a Pinball Wizard episode of his Pop Culture Quest, which is a TV series, cool little TV series he did.
Yeah, I like that show.
But either way, man, the one thing I got, which is, we're so off topic at the end of this podcast, but I do have to say, it's really unfortunate because Mark Hamill he was a very handsome kid. Like, he was a very good looking kid. And then that fucking motorcycle accident, I feel like really fucked him. Like, I think if he had been post Star Wars, I think he probably would have had a better career if the accident hadn't aged him so much. Because I think even by end of Return of the Jedi, he was only like 26 or 27, if I'm not mistaken. He was still a very young man. He just, but anyways, it's very unfortunate. But when you see young Mark Hamill with his big blue eyes and his, his toe head, and he's just a very good looking kid. But anyways,
he's beautiful in Sarah T. Portrait of an Alcoholic. And,
exactly.
And I was going to point out Linda Blair as your all-time girlfriend, but not in this movie. It would have to be a Twinkie story in this movie.
Exactly.
She's a little girl with braces, but man, she tore my heart out a little bit for a TV movie.
The thing is, man, I find it unfair. I think it's because of the work she did post The Exorcist, but she got for a long time like, she's not a really good actress, and it's like, that's not very fair. She was a very capable actress. I just don't think the material that she was offered or whatever. I think one hand she got. I do think maybe her performance in The Heretic, Exorcist to The Heretic is, but
how do you say no to the sequel to The Exorcist?
I know, exactly. Blair? But I will say, and I can say this because she was 18 at the time, that is really where I was like, damn, she was very cute. There was something about the proportions of Linda Blair's face that I find she's very cute. Anyways, but she was 18, so I could say that. And And again, my crush started when it was also age appropriate. So
Yes,
let me just say that. But and also she's much older than me, so it's fine. But yeah, it's funny because when you sent before we recorded this, you sent that, and I didn't realize that the link. I thought the link you sent me was to an article, and I was like, oh, it's literally the whole movie. I was like, I'm actually going to watch this. I wasn't able to do it before we recorded, but I'm just because I want to see it, just because that whole Mark Hamill, Linda Blair TV movie directed by Richard Donner, and it's like sort of like one of those after school special type of films. I'm like, I totally up my alley. I'm going to definitely watch this. So, I haven't watched it yet, but I will.
And you know what? It is on YouTube for anyone that wants to look it up in a surprisingly great looking print. It must be off of a DVD or something.
Yeah, I was gonna say exactly. It's ripped right off of the disc because it looks clean as hell.
Yeah, for a 1975 TV movie, this thing looks like it was remastered a couple of years ago. And there's one that we haven't mentioned yet. I don't know if you've seen it, but it actually does link back into the alcoholism thing. And I am going to name drop it real quick, not to end this on too depressing of a note, because it really is maybe with all of the other stuff we've mentioned, this might be Donner's most depressing film, and that was Radio Flyer.
Oh, thank you. I meant to say it. I have a very weird specific story about this. I remember my mom and dad, we rented it, and my mom and dad started watching it. And I remember they literally both they were just sort of, I don't know if it was because it was too depressing. At the time, there's a lot of those sort of like the formula of like looking back on your childhood. Like, there's like an element of that, like even like Stand By Me. But it's like, yeah, it's very depressing. There's abuse to things. I remember as a kid sort of drawing or doing something else. But I remember my parents watching it and being kind of like, I think this is enough of this. And I don't know if it was, I honestly don't remember, like in my memory, I don't know if it was because they thought it was bad or if they were just like, this is too depressing and why are we watching this?
It's extremely dark. And apparently Donner himself like cleaned it up because he loves kids. Yeah. It's a story about two kids growing up with an alcoholic stepfather and their mother, played by Lorraine Braccio, doing a great job. But she's getting beat as well. And the two kids are bonding and trying to figure out a way to escape from this creepy stepdad who they call the King, which just adds to the creepiness. And he's played by Adam Baldwin, and you never really see his full face. You just you'll see his lanky body kind of swagger over and get a beer out of the fridge or something. And you'll hear him yell. And there's always the aftermath. Like you don't really see the kids beaten a lot, but you see them go to bed with like black eyes. This is what I remember anyways. It's been a long time since I've seen it. And then there's stuff that happens to their dog that's really, really upsetting and has always upset me. But it's all building towards, will they or will they not get away? And if they do get away, will that in and of itself kill them because of the way that they're planning to get away, which involves the Radio Flyer wagon of the title. Really dark movie. I don't, like I said, I think Donner has gone on record saying he lightened it up. I don't see where. I don't see how it's possible. Elijah Wood. It was my first time seeing Elijah Wood. What an incredibly talented child actor. Still an incredibly talented adult actor. Although I respect the hell out of him as a producer right now. He's doing some really great horror movies. And Joseph Mazzello, is that his name? The boy that plays his brother. He went on to do Jurassic Park, and it came from this movie because Steven Spielberg came to visit the set and met Joseph Mazzello and put him in Jurassic Park, at which, of course, Richard Donner was up for Jurassic Park as well. Michael Crichton really wanted Richard Donner. So, yeah, it's of note. Inside moves, I can justify saying, like, there's actually some pretty good laughs. There's no good laughs in Radio Flyer. It's a very difficult movie to recommend, but it shouldn't go by unmentioned in a filmography like this.
Yeah, in fact, I remember it was a big. I remember the ads for it. I remember, it was a big-ish movie. It might have, was it up for like Oscars or
no? Inside Moves is the only thing he ever did that got nominated for anything.
Interesting.
Or for anything in the major categories. I think his stuff got nominated a lot for effects and things.
Effects and yeah, exactly. But yeah, we probably should have peppered that one in the middle and not end on one about child abuse. But
yeah.
But I remember, like, there's like at this time again, there's these weird things. Like I think A Boy's Life maybe came out a few years around. Like there's a lot of like heavy movies about kids being beat like by their like. There's just a lot of that going on, and it, and then a lot of like kids go into their imagination to and it's just one of those things. But yeah, the thing is, I'm glad we did this just because obviously we did it as a way to honor the passing of Richard Donner and stuff and celebrate his. But it's also just he's not somebody that I would have, if we did a short list of people like, let's make an episode about this director. Donner's not somebody that I think would have automatically come to my mind. But then when you sit down and think about the films that he's done, and we didn't even get into the things he produced and stuff like that, but like,
right. He produced The Lost Boys. People forget that he produced the first X-Men.
It's and the thing is, like, because we didn't Lady Hawk, but that's where he met his wife, or Laura. I'm going to fuck up her name, but she's a very well respected, still to this day productive, active producer. I think she is. I think she's still producing. Yeah, she is. Yeah, I mean, she's she was super important in the early Marvel films and stuff.
Yeah, Lauren Schuler Donner.
Thank you. I was going to say exactly. Laura Schuler Donner.
They got their stars on the Walk of Fame the same day. I think that's one of the cutest things I've ever heard.
That's very adorable. But yeah, anyways, but I'm glad we did this, just because obviously he's super important in film, fantastic director, and I'm happy we did this. And like every time we do this, I learned a bunch of fun stuff that I didn't know. I feel like every time we talk, my own weird production trivia, like film trivia, like all those anyways, you're always you do a lot of amazing research and stuff, and you have a very extensive knowledge about all the idiosyncratic, get this out. Anyways, I learned a lot, Devin. That's what I'm trying to say. My brain injury and almost 3 hours of recording, I think I have no more brain cells left to spare.
Trying to check out. But I do want to say a final thing on Richard Donner.
Sure.
Just kind of speaking off the top of my head, because like I said before, he was a major influence on my life. His work is my first memory of life, and what he did taught me what a director was in ways beyond what George Lucas or Steven Spielberg ever did. I learned about directing from watching his interviews and from understanding his movies growing up, and seeing the common threads, even though, Goonies is nothing like Lethal Weapon, is nothing like Superman, is nothing like Inside Moves.
Yep.
Everything was so unique, but at the same time, the Richard Donner style ran through it. And we throw out a lot of hyperbole on this show. So-and-so is brilliant, or such and such is visionary. And we sincerely mean most of it.
No.
So I don't want to say that we don't. But if there's one word that ever applied to any one director ever, Richard Donner can truly be called an expert. The reason why he's not mentioned as much as the Spielbergs and the Lucases is because he wasn't creating this stuff in the same way. He was a journeyman. He was a director for hire, and he found other people's scripts and said, hey, I can do something with this. He's not up there with Hitchcock or Ford necessarily. He's up there with like William Wyler and William Wellman and Michael Curtiz. And if you're a film geek, you know these names. And that's not an insult to say that he's different from these other people. It's just to say he approached it with a different discipline, and he was truly an expert at what he did. And whoever would work with him knew they were in the hands of a true expert. I think he was the ultimate expert filmmaker. He'll continue to be an influence, even though outside of that Timeline movie, I've seen everything. Rewatching everything will continue to influence me for the rest of my life.
But I couldn't say it better, man. I think that sums it up.
Well, thanks for coming out and visiting me again tonight, James. I know it's been a little while.
Yeah, hopefully we can get the next one out. Maybe we get the next one out a little bit quicker. But I thought this was going to be a very short episode, but I do think we gave a very meaty, hefty, solid episode to our listeners. So at least I feel good about that.
Yeah, I think we gave Donner his due, as much of his due as a couple of guys like us can give.
Exactly, 2 knuckleheads like us.
But we'll be back soon. We've got something that we're going to try that I think will get us doing some things a little bit faster than we have been. I know I've been saying that. But as long as another one of my heroes doesn't die in the next couple of days, we've already lost Robert Downey Sr. since Donner. So, I'm crossing my fingers that my favorite filmmakers are safe for a little while, and that maybe we can do some more light shows, smaller shows, and then get back to the deep dives like this one.
Exactly.
But I did feel that Ned Beatty deserved a deep dive, and then that became Richard Donner. It was an avalanche of sad movie news right there.
That's right.
two heroes. So yes, please get out, watch all these movies, learn everything you can from them, and enjoy the hell out of them. And in the meantime, be good, stay safe. We'll see you later, James.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.